Harold said goodbye to an elderly woman and mentioned he'd come back the next day. Even the people around him could tell he looked unusually happy since he had finally managed to get the house he had always dreamed of. But the moment he reached it, everything flipped. The entire place was already reduced to ashes. He just dropped to the ground and broke down, like life had congratulated him and destroyed everything in the same second. He had barely gotten what he wanted, and it was gone instantly. After the fire settled, he walked back toward town, feeling completely numb. His mind felt blank, and his chest heavy, like nothing really mattered anymore. He kept thinking about how it happened, since the fire had already finished by the time he got back from work. That meant someone could have done it on purpose. Honestly, his luck felt so terrible that even bad luck itself would feel uncomfortable going this far. While walking, he overheard a group of adventurers talking loudly about magic swords and hidden treasure inside a maze where people could get rich if they had talent. That part hit him the hardest. Harold had no magic ability, no sword skills, and nothing special about him. His strength and intelligence were both just average, and for a 25-year-old suddenly needing money, that was a big problem. He figured that if he had enough money, losing the house wouldn't hurt as much. So he went to the bank only to find out he had just 150,000 rubes left. It was barely enough for a month of simple work, even though he had once saved over 20 million through non-stop labor like repairing tools, woodworking, and collecting herbs. All of that money had gone into the house that was now gone. He withdrew everything he had left, already aware he was about to make some bad decisions. He thought about wasting it on food or gambling, but then he noticed a sign about a slave auction. It was something rarely seen since it existed in a legal gray area. A merchant quickly approached him, almost like he could sense Harold's desperation. Harold said there was no way he could afford it, since slaves usually started at around 2 million rubes. But the merchant explained that some could start as low as 10,000, and if no one bid, they might even be sold cheaply. It sounded like terrible advice, but also strangely tempting, so Harold stepped inside just to watch. The hall was filled with wealthy people, and there was only one empty seat left. It quickly became clear he was just being used to make the place look more active. As the merchant welcomed everyone and explained their traveling auction system, Harold quietly thought that with his house gone, maybe leaving town and moving around was the only option left for him. The auction began, and the merchant introduced the first item, an elf slave brought out in chains, dressed in a way meant to grab attention. The entire room instantly became excited, like something rare had just appeared. The merchant started praising her abilities, saying she was skilled with a bow, capable in magic, and highly educated. The bidding started at 20 million rubes, and Harold quickly understood he had walked into something way beyond his level. It didn't even feel like a normal market. People started raising their hands instantly, and within seconds the price shot up to 633 million. The energy in the room turned wild, like everyone was competing just to show how rich they were. In the end, the elf was bought by an older knight, someone who clearly didn't care about appearances as long as he could afford it. Watching all this, Harold realized the problem wasn't just that he was poor, it was that he didn't even belong in the same world as these people. One after another, more slaves were brought out, beast women, even a demon, and every time the same thing happened. The prices kept rising fast, and the crowd kept throwing money around like it meant nothing. It stopped feeling like business and started looking more like a competition to see who could spend the most. Then the final slave was brought out, and everything changed instantly. She was a dark elf, and the reaction from the room completely flipped. The same people who were excited earlier suddenly went quiet. Some started whispering about bad luck, curses, and how dark elves brought trouble. It was like everyone had already decided she wasn't worth the risk. The merchant still tried to promote her, saying she could fight, handle chores, and use magic. But no one responded. The silence in the room felt heavy. When the starting price dropped all the way down to 150,000 rubes, Harold noticed something strange. That number matched exactly what he had left. At that moment, it felt like everything lined up for one risky choice. He had already lost his house and most of his savings, and now he was being pushed towards something completely unexpected. With no one else bidding, he slowly raised his hand. The entire room turned to look at him like he had just made a terrible decision. The deal went through, and just like that, Harold bought the dark elf for 150,000 rubes. It could either be the luckiest purchase he had ever made, or the worst mistake of his life. After the auction, the merchant mentioned that dark elves could sell for over $1 billion in other places, but he still honored the deal, saying his reputation mattered more than profit. Then he explained how the control collar worked and told Harold to activate it with his blood. Before doing anything, Harold gave her a warning. She calmly introduced herself as Adi, speaking like this situation was nothing new to her. That calmness felt heavier than fear. He put the collar on, introduced himself, and noticed how she seemed slightly shy but relieved, saying she was glad he looked like a kind person. At that point, Harold understood that things had changed completely. He had walked in planning to waste his last bit of money, but instead he walked out with a responsibility he couldn't ignore. It felt less like a random choice, and more like the beginning of something he couldn't turn back from. Harold tossed a coat over Addie so she could cover her ears. He figured walking around with a dark elf in public would only attract attention he didn't want. It felt like the kind of situation that could pull him into trouble for no reason. As they stepped out of the auction hall, they noticed the old armored man who had bought the elf earlier. He was standing in the middle of a crowd, almost like he was showing off his purchase. Ati glanced at the elf, and the elf responded with a sharp, hateful look before turning away, as if just seeing Ati annoyed her. They kept walking, and Harold quietly asked what that was about, still trying to process what he had just seen. Ati explained calmly that dark elves and regular elves didn't get along, so reactions like that were normal. It wasn't personal, just how things were. Harold thought it was unfair to judge someone based on race, but he also understood he didn't know much about this world's past. He decided not to think too deeply about it for now. The day had already been overwhelming enough. He then tried to figure out where they could go next, only to remember his house was gone. The mood dropped again. He told her they had nowhere to return to and couldn't even afford a place to stay since all his money was gone. Buying her had used up everything, which he knew was probably the most reckless decision he had ever made. Still, he mentioned an old cabin near the base of a mountain that no one used anymore. Ati agreed without hesitation or complaint, which caught him off guard. He expected at least some concern, but she stayed calm. As they walked, Harold noticed she was still barely dressed and suggested they get her proper clothes later. She refused right away, saying she didn't want to add more burden since he had no money left. That response surprised him. In a situation like this, she was the one being considerate. For some reason, that made him feel a bit lighter. Even after losing everything, having someone steady beside him helped him stay grounded. He told her that if she needed anything, she should just say it. He expected something simple like food or clothes. Instead, she asked for weapons and armor. That caught him off guard. She explained that since they had no money, their best option was to explore the maze. Even the upper levels could earn them enough to survive. She mentioned she had experience with places like that and just needed some time to adjust. Harold remembered the merchant saying she could use magic and had dungeon experience, so this wasn't just talk. On top of that, with how dark elves were treated, getting a normal job wasn't realistic for her. The maze wasn't just a choice, it was their only practical path forward. To show what she meant, she picked up a small stone and threw it upward without much effort. A bird dropped from the sky instantly. Harold stood there trying to process what he had just seen, realizing she had taken it down with a single throw. She looked a bit embarrassed and said she had only managed to hit one bird, adding that if she had a bow or even a gun, she could probably take down 3 at once. The way she said only one made it sound like she had just missed a perfect combo. That was the moment Harold understood she wasn't fragile at all. She was way more capable than she looked. With her skills and weapons and magic, the idea of going into the maze didn't feel as suicidal anymore. It actually started to sound like a possible way to survive. Even then, he told her they would need to prepare properly and back out if things got dangerous. He made it clear that earning money wasn't worth risking their lives, especially when everything already felt like it was going wrong for him. Adi smiled slightly and said she would be careful because she didn't want to die. She also added that she would protect him too. That small smile caught him off guard. It was the first time he had seen her smile, and it stayed in his mind longer than he expected. Then he got confused. He hadn't even planned on entering the maze himself, so he didn't understand why she kept talking about protecting him. When they reached the cabin near the base of the mountain, Adi looked around with surprise. Even though it was abandoned, it was still in good condition. Harold explained that he used to repair it whenever he came there to collect herbs, so it never fully fell apart. She offered to cook right away, and he let her handle it without arguing. It felt strangely natural, like they had already settled into a routine. After eating, she lay down near the furnace to stay warm. Harold quietly gave her a blanket so she wouldn't feel cold during the night. At some point, she suddenly woke up and looked at him with tension, as if expecting something bad. He quickly reassured her that he wasn't going to do anything. She thanked him softly and fell asleep almost immediately, but instead of feeling relieved, he felt uneasy. It made him wonder if she was only pretending to sleep out of fear, which hinted at the kind of life she must have had before. Out of curiosity, he gently poked her cheek, and she didn't react at all. For a brief moment, his eyes drifted toward her face, but he quickly looked away, feeling like he had crossed a line just by thinking about it. The next morning, he woke up and started handling a knife absent-mindedly. Soon after, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed through the forest. A group of Imperial soldiers passed by in formation, heading east. Harold immediately felt something was off because, as far as he knew, there wasn't any war going on with the kingdom of Tawakkul. Adi watched quietly and admitted she didn't know much about what was happening on this continent either, which made her uneasy. It felt like something bigger might be going on. Harold casually asked why she didn't just leave and go to another continent, but she reacted with clear shock, as if that idea itself didn't make sense to her. Harold shrugged and said they could just earn enough money and go wherever she wanted. After a short pause, she admitted she wanted to travel to the southwest corner of the southern continent. somewhere near the Great Astral Gorge. He agreed right away without overthinking it, even though he clearly hadn't planned anything that far ahead. As he thought about it more, he realized traveling south by ship wouldn't be cheap, especially with routes tied to labyrinth trade. That meant one thing: money was going to decide everything. If she planned to earn it inside the labyrinth, then he would probably have to go with her. The problem was, the only weapon he really knew how to use was an old spear his father had taught him, and using a spear in narrow dungeon corridors didn't sound like the smartest idea. She then asked why he hadn't questioned her reason for wanting to go there. He admitted that if the situation were reversed, he would probably be curious too. Sitting beside her, he awkwardly reached out and touched her ear, telling her that whatever the reason was, he didn't want her to leave, and he didn't plan on letting go of her either. For a second, it looked like he was about to lean in closer, but he stopped himself at the last moment and completely ruined the mood. Trying to recover, he quickly added that she could tell him anything whenever she was ready, because she mattered to him. She blushed deeply and softly said that if she was that important, then maybe she wasn't really a slave. But she cut herself off before finishing the thought. She touched her lips and quietly admitted that moment would have been her first kiss. Later, Harold went back into town to buy supplies and suddenly remembered he had technically lost his job because of the fire. He stood outside his old workplace, hesitating, unsure whether to go in or just walk away from everything. Before he could decide, the owner rushed out, saw him, and immediately broke down in tears while grabbing him. It turned out the man had believed Harold died in the fire and had been grieving the whole time, which completely changed the mood. Once inside, Harold explained everything: the fire, losing his home, and his plan to head south toward the labyrinth. The owner didn't ask too many questions. Instead, he went to the back and returned with an envelope full of money. Harold tried to refuse, saying he hadn't earned it, but the man insisted it was a retirement gift for his 15 years of hard work. He said it was only natural for a master to take care of his student. After thanking him properly, Harold left and headed back to the cabin, feeling lighter than he had in a long time. When he arrived, she had already prepared food, and there was a large chicken on the table, like she had hunted it herself without much effort. He handed her a hat so she could cover her ears more easily in public. She smiled in a way that made it seem like the simple gift meant a lot more than it should have. The next day, they went to an equipment shop to prepare for the labyrinth. Harold asked what weapon he should get, expecting a simple answer. Instead, Adi calmly explained that every weapon had its strengths and weaknesses, then casually picked a sniper rifle like it was the most normal choice. He just stood there, trying to process how she went from throwing rocks at birds to choosing long-range weapons so confidently. The shop owner mentioned the price: 50,000 rubes. Harold immediately wondered if she should get something more expensive, thinking a higher price meant better performance. But she shook her head and said the low cost was exactly why she preferred it. She also mentioned she liked using a clean, single-shot rifle. Then she added that a magic bow would be even stronger. When Harold looked at the price tag and saw 8 million rubes, he instantly dropped the idea. That wasn't just expensive, it was completely out of reach. So the rifle became the obvious choice. Adi explained that guns still had strong power and penetration, and bullets were relatively cheap as long as they didn't waste them. The only downsides were the noise and the slightly higher difficulty in aiming, but those could be managed with attachments and skill. She spoke about it all with surprising enthusiasm. Harold noticed the shift. For once, she didn't sound cautious or distant. She sounded genuinely interested, almost excited. He found himself just watching her talk, feeling a bit lighter seeing her like that. He told the shop owner to pack everything she needed: the rifle, a noise-reducing attachment, ammunition, gloves, a belt, and some armor. Adi's reaction was immediate. She lit up with happiness and thanked him, promising she would make herself useful. After leaving the shop, they started heading toward the labyrinth. On the way, Adi noticed Harold barely had any equipment. She pointed out that as her master, he should be better protected. But he brushed it off, saying her gear mattered more right now and that he would upgrade later once they earned some money. In reality, he was carrying a basic short spear that didn't look very reliable. Even he admitted it might not survive a serious hit, meaning he might only get one proper use out of it. As they continued walking, Ati explained how the labyrinth worked. She said monster activity depended on how stable the surrounding region was. Hunters were allowed to keep materials from monsters as a form of payment, since clearing them helped prevent creatures from spilling out into nearby areas. Harold listened quietly, realizing how little he knew about all of this. He couldn't help but think that he wished his father had taught him more about these things when he was younger. Back then, his father had trained him, but always said he didn't have any real talent. That line stayed with him more than it should have. His father had been a well-known labyrinth hunter, someone respected, but one day he went too deep and never returned. Going that far with just a spear was basically asking for trouble. He had chased something big at the bottom and paid the price for it. Harold had already lost his mother to illness before that, so after losing his father too, being alone just became normal for him. That was why he hated feeling weak now. Running away wasn't something he wanted to do anymore. Adi noticed his expression change and asked if something was wrong. He brushed it off quickly, saying he was fine, then thanked her for knowing so much about the labyrinth. She got a little embarrassed and said there was no need to thank her, which only made him notice how soft her reactions were. Neither of them really knew how to handle moments like that, so it just turned into quiet, awkward energy between them. After a while, they reached the labyrinth entrance. The place was crowded with explorers waiting to go inside. Just as they got closer, a guard called out and stopped Harold. For a second, he thought there might be an entry fee, but the guard clarified that entry was free. That wasn't the issue. The guard looked serious and warned everyone that something unusual was happening inside. Monsters that normally stayed deep in the lower floors were now being reported near the upper levels. It meant the easier areas weren't safe anymore. A group of knights organized a search and went in to check the upper floors. After some time, they came back without finding anything. Since no one had clear proof, the search was eventually called off. Even so, the guard warned everyone to stay alert, just in case something was actually hiding inside. Harold leaned closer to Addie and quietly asked what she thought about it. She said it could just be a small number of monsters, maybe 2 or 3, and false reports weren't uncommon. Still, she added that even a small chance was enough reason to be careful. Right behind them, a group of loud explorers started boasting that they would handle any monsters themselves. They pushed past others like they owned the place and headed straight for the entrance. When they noticed Harold and Addie, they started mocking them, telling them to go home if they wanted to survive. One of them laughed and said Harold didn't look like someone capable, adding that he wasn't Edwin Smith. Another dismissed the past entirely, saying that era was over and now it belonged to Gergo. The group laughed like they had just delivered the greatest insult ever. Meanwhile, Harold was left standing there, realizing they had just thrown around his father's name without even knowing it. He didn't even get time to process that before things got worse. One of the explorers noticed Addie and started acting strange. He grinned, called her cute in a way that didn't feel right, and began walking toward her like he was about to cross a line. That was enough. Harold didn't think, he just moved. His spear came forward in a fast strike so sudden the man barely reacted. The attack missed by a small margin, but the message was clear. Harold warned him that if he looked at her like that again, he wouldn't miss next time. The mood changed instantly. The same group that had been loud a second ago went completely still. The man quickly backed off, saying it was just a joke and telling Harold to relax. At the same time, Addie had already raised her rifle, ready to fire, which made everything even more tense. Harold noticed and wondered if he had gone too far. He lowered his spear and stepped back, deciding it wasn't worth wasting time on them. As they walked away, the group whispered among themselves, admitting they hadn't even seen his attack clearly. A moment ago, they thought he was weak. Now, they weren't so sure. They finally entered the labyrinth. Harold paused for a second, taking in the surroundings. The walls and ground gave off a faint glow, lighting the space in an unusual way. Addie explained that this effect was known as labyrinth luminance, which was why everything looked like that. She quietly thanked him for stepping in earlier and got a little embarrassed midway. Then she admitted that when he had called her his woman, it affected her more than he probably realized. He didn't fully catch what she meant though, and the moment passed. As they moved deeper inside, she suddenly stopped and fired into the darkness without warning. The shot echoed through the tunnel. She calmly said she had hit something. When they checked, a small monster was already lying dead. Harold hadn't even seen it. To him, it had just been darkness. She explained that her senses were sharp, so detecting movement in low light wasn't difficult for her. That was when it really sank in for him. She wasn't just capable, she was dependable in a way he hadn't expected. He asked if they could go further in. She replied that she had reached the middle of the lower levels before, but never alone. That made him curious. Someone with her skills shouldn't have needed help. So he asked if she used to have companions. She went quiet after that, not giving any answer. She eventually spoke up, saying she had friends back on the Western continent. Her tone dropped, and the atmosphere changed immediately. It was clear there was more behind it, and none of it sounded good. They sat down near the monster's body to rest, and after a quiet moment, she started opening up. She explained that she used to be part of an all-women labyrinth group. Harold got curious, but when he noticed how uneasy she seemed while talking, he told her she didn't have to continue if it was painful. There was no pressure. She thanked him, but still chose to go on because she wanted him to understand who she really was. Their group had been successful and made good money clearing the maze. But things went wrong when their leader got involved with a man and began giving away their earnings without thinking. No matter how much they worked, it was never enough for him. Then one day, everything fell apart. She was drugged, lost consciousness, and woke up already sold to a slave trader. Just like that, she went from being part of a team to being treated like an item. She explained that pure dark elves were sold for higher prices, so to those people, she wasn't seen as a person at all. Hearing that, Harold felt uneasy and apologized for making her relive it. He also didn't hold back in calling her former leader irresponsible. She shook her head and said that if things hadn't happened that way, she wouldn't have met him. If she had ended up with someone cruel, she would have hated her past even more. Instead, she found herself feeling strangely grateful. It hadn't even been a full day, yet she already trusted him. That caught him off guard. He didn't feel like he had done anything special, but hearing that made him quietly decide he needed to do better from now on. As he started cutting the monster for materials, she softly mentioned that if she ever developed feelings for him, she might end up doing something reckless for his sake too. He didn't hear that at all. They continued deeper into the labyrinth. With each step, she became more efficient with the rifle, taking down monsters with precise single shots. It turned into a steady rhythm. One shot, one kill, reload, repeat. Harold could only watch as she handled most of the work. After gathering a decent amount of materials like mole fur, he started complaining about the weight and suggested heading back before it got worse. But she stopped him and pointed ahead. There was a single door standing on its own. It looked completely out of place, like one of those moments that could either lead to something valuable or something dangerous. He had been ready to leave, but seeing that door changed his mood instantly. The moment Treasure came into the picture, Harold completely forgot how tired he was. They decided to check it out. Adi cast a spell, and small, glowing butterflies appeared, floating gently through the air. He just stood there watching, surprised by how natural it looked. She explained that the butterflies moved toward danger and would stop near traps, helping them avoid anything risky. That caught his attention. It made him realize she wasn't just strong in combat. She had a lot of useful skills. She added that she knew other spells too, even if they weren't flashy. One of the butterflies landed on the wall near the door, marking a trap. That was enough to confirm something valuable was likely inside. She explained that labyrinths seemed to function almost like living systems. Once Treasure was taken, the layout would reset somewhere else with new traps, as if the place constantly rearranged itself. They stepped inside and found a pedestal with a weapon resting on it. It looked too clean, almost suspicious. The butterflies gathered around it, signaling danger. She explained it was actually a cursed dagger, something rare to find at that level. Harold didn't know what to do, so he asked for her opinion. She explained that if the curse was purely negative, it couldn't be used or sold. To understand it properly, they would need special tools or magic to identify it, and those tools were extremely expensive. When he asked how expensive, she said it would cost about as much as a house. That hit him hard, considering everything he had just lost. Still, she added that if they kept working in the lower levels, they could eventually earn that much, maybe even faster if things went well. For now, he decided they would take it slow. The goal was to earn enough money for their journey, not take unnecessary risks. They both agreed and left the labyrinth with what they had gathered. Outside the entrance, a large crowd had formed. Something was clearly happening. When they got closer, they saw the same armored knight from the auction hall, along with the elf he had bought. People around them whispered that he was the third son of a count and often explored labyrinths. He pulled on the elf's chain and displayed her openly, treating her more like an object than a person. Then he loudly asked her to state who her master was, drawing even more attention as the crowd watched closely. Harold clenched his fists and muttered that anyone treated like that should fight back, but he already knew the collar made that impossible. The knight kept going, bragging about how beautiful the elf was, how she could use magic, and how she would keep him company at night. He said it all so casually, like he had never been challenged in his life. What made it worse was the crowd reacting with interest instead of discomfort. Addie tried to look past the people to see what was happening, but she couldn't get a clear view. Harold told her not to bother and quietly guided her away. Some things weren't worth watching. They returned to town and headed to the Nepal Trading Company, a place Harold used to visit back when he worked as a silversmith under his old master. It was where explorers sold materials collected from the labyrinth. Inside, the butler, Tosu, greeted him politely and quickly noticed Addie. Harold laid out the materials they had gathered. Tosu seemed surprised to hear Harold had switched from crafting to exploring, but didn't question it further. After checking the items, Tosu said each piece was worth 500 rubes, bringing the total to 12,000. Harold was caught off guard. That was nearly double what he used to earn after working all day before. One run in the labyrinth had already outperformed his old routine. He then asked about travel costs to the southern continent. Later, back at the cabin, he explained everything to Adi. Taking the western route would cost around 3 million rubes for both of them and was considered safer. Going directly south would cost closer to 10 million because it involved passing through dangerous undersea labyrinth routes, which took longer and carried more risk. He decided the safer option made more sense and estimated they would need around 5 million in total to travel comfortably. Over the next several days, they kept returning to the labyrinth, steadily collecting materials and earning money bit by bit. After about a week, they had made 170,000 rubes, and even after covering living expenses, they still had 120,000 left. It wasn't fast, but it was reliable. Eventually, Harold suggested they should try moving into the middle levels. Addie agreed, saying she could already handle stronger monsters without much difficulty. She spoke about it casually, which somehow made it feel more serious. They prepared to go deeper the next day, both feeling a bit more confident after their progress. But at the same time, it felt like things were about to change, as if something bigger was waiting ahead. At the middle level of the labyrinth, Harold was still wondering what kind of monsters they might face when Addie suddenly stopped. He asked what was wrong, and she quietly said she didn't like the feeling of this place. He checked around, thinking maybe something in the air or the path felt off, but she shook her head. Then she lowered her voice and said something was coming. They quickly hid behind nearby rocks. Moments later, a massive creature burst through the wall, as if the dungeon itself didn't matter to it. The ground shook with every step it took. It let out a roar and continued moving forward. Once it passed, Addie explained that it came from the lower floors. Harold immediately understood how serious that was. She identified it as some kind of earth dragon. The earlier warning from the guards suddenly made sense. She apologized and said normal bullets wouldn't do much against it. Its skin was too tough. Harold didn't hesitate. He said they were leaving. There was no reason to risk their lives against something like that. She agreed. But just as they were about to go, someone came running toward them, shouting for help. It was one of the explorers from earlier, the same one who had mocked them. Now he looked completely shaken. He explained that a high-level earth dragon had appeared. His group was trapped inside a crack in the rock, and the creature was waiting outside for them. He begged for help. Harold recognized him and immediately thought about refusing. This situation was far too dangerous. But then the man mentioned that his friends had children waiting for them at home. That changed everything. Harold remembered what it felt like to lose his own father inside a labyrinth. Without saying much more, he asked where they were. The explorer realized he might actually help and quickly pointed the way. Harold let out a quiet breath and told Addie to stay close and protect him if anything happened. He mentioned having a secret weapon and ran ahead before she could question it. She followed after him, clearly worried. When Harold reached the location, he saw the earth dragon attacking the crack where the explorers were hiding. The creature didn't even pay attention to him at first, treating him like he didn't matter. He stepped forward, tightened his grip on the spear, and said under his breath that the dragon had already lost. Then he activated his hidden ability. His entire body reacted instantly. Every muscle tightened beyond its limits, as if it was about to tear apart. Energy surged through him from somewhere unnatural. It wasn't magic, but it felt even more dangerous. His body began to break under the strain. His skin started tearing, his head throbbed like it might split, and even the spear in his hands began to warp from the heat. In that moment, Harold remembered his father's warning that this power was never meant to be shown to anyone. The technique had a name, Blazing Continent-Piercing Spear. He threw. The spear shot forward, wrapped in intense flames, cutting straight through the dragon's body as if it wasn't even there. One strike was enough. The fight ended instantly. The backlash hit him just as fast. Blood streamed from his eyes and nose, and his body gave out. He collapsed on the spot. When he opened his eyes again, his head was resting on something soft. Addie was holding him on her lap, tears running down her face as she asked if he was awake. He told her he was fine and slowly sat up, still dizzy but conscious. She immediately scolded him for pushing himself that far and made him promise to be more careful next time. He agreed, knowing how dangerous that had looked. The explorers he saved came over, completely different from before. Their leader apologized for earlier and thanked him, clearly shaken as he talked about almost never seeing his children again. The shift in his attitude was obvious. After they left, Harold looked at the dragon's body and casually suggested they take it back and sell it. Even after nearly collapsing, he was already thinking about what it was worth. Addie pointed out that dismantling it wouldn't be easy since its skin was extremely tough, but the hole from his attack made it possible. Then she looked at him seriously and asked how he managed to do that. He explained that the move he used was called Blazing Continent-Piercing Spear. She paused at the name alone, clearly realizing how extreme it sounded. He added that the downside was severe. Every time he used it, he would lose consciousness, and even the weapon couldn't withstand the heat. It wasn't something he could rely on more than once in a fight. She immediately told him not to use it again, saying she had been genuinely scared. He said he would try, though it didn't sound fully convincing. The explorers returned and offered to help carry the dragon, saying they owed him their lives. The same people who had mocked him earlier now worked alongside him without hesitation. At the material shop, the clerk examined everything and then stated the price, 13 million rubes. For a moment, Harold couldn't react. One fight had completely changed his situation. Addie noticed and grabbed his arm, asking if he was okay, while he tried to process it. It made sense why so many people risked their lives in the labyrinth. The rewards were on a completely different level. Since the amount was so high, the clerk asked for his bank details to complete the transaction. Even though his body remained sore for the next 2 days from the strain of the technique, the result made it hard to regret. When Harold checked his account later and saw the full amount sitting there, he just stared at it, half expecting it to disappear. After everything he had been through, the number didn't feel real, but it meant one thing for sure. They no longer had to struggle just to afford the journey. The trip toward the western route was finally possible. On the way back, he bought Addie a peach tart. She asked if he wanted some, and when he said no, she immediately lit up and happily took the whole thing for herself. While she was eating, he told her to listen for a second and explained that they finally had enough money. Tomorrow, they would head to the port city and begin their trip south. She thanked him between bites, clearly enjoying something as simple as the pastry. After everything that had happened, the moment felt calm, almost normal. The next morning, they waited for the carriage that would take them to the port. From there, they planned to cross to the western continent and then travel further south. As the carriage started moving, Harold caught a glimpse of the burned remains of his house. He remembered how, not long ago, he thought everything was over. Now, somehow, he was traveling with money in his account and a capable partner beside him. He looked at Adi and smiled. She asked if something was wrong, and he instead asked what the western continent was like. She described it as rough but lively, filled with different races and constant conflict, yet interesting because of that variety. He said she could show him around when they arrived, and she agreed, saying she had been thinking the same. Then she quietly added that he needed her, and that thought alone made her happy. During the ride, 2 more passengers joined them, a young woman and an older man she called her grandfather. The old man kept looking at Harold, as if trying to remember something. He said he felt like he had seen him before. Harold asked if he might be mistaken, but the man replied that if the person he was thinking of were still alive, he wouldn't look this young. He mentioned that the man used a spear and was incredibly strong. Before he could continue, the young woman interrupted him, telling him to stop being rude and saying he always mixed up names and faces. To prove his point, the old man casually listed everyone's names correctly, showing his memory wasn't as bad as she claimed. Then he mentioned a name that made Harold pause for a moment. It sounded familiar, though he couldn't immediately place it. The young woman quickly told him to stop talking and apologized for his behavior, clearly used to situations like this. The old man also apologized, and Harold brushed it off without making a big deal out of it. The old man then sat back down, muttering about how his granddaughter kept scolding him and wondering how many more times it would happen before they even reached the western continent. Harold asked if they were heading to the same place, and the old man, Vaughn, happily said they would be traveling together for a while and was looking forward to it. As they got closer to the port city, Addie spotted a large ship in the distance and said they must be near. Once they arrived, Vaughn said goodbye and wished them a safe trip. The young woman, Seal, mentioned they were boarding a ship called Bistia and suggested they join if they hadn't chosen one yet. After parting ways, Adi asked what he wanted to do. Harold said that if the price wasn't too high, going with a familiar option sounded safer than picking a random ship. At the ticket office, the clerk explained that many ships were currently heading to the western continent, so they had options. When Harold asked about the Bistia, the clerk said it was just a standard ship. Then he listed the price, 8 million rubes for both of them. That included a private room, 2 meals a day, and about a month of travel. Then he offered a cheaper option, 200,000 per person for a shared space with a dozen others, minimal food, and very basic conditions. The difference was obvious. They stepped outside to think. Harold pointed out how expensive the better option was, but the cheaper one didn't sound reliable at all. They decided to take a little time before choosing and went to look for a place to rest. Everything felt calm for a moment. Then suddenly, a kid rushed between them and grabbed Harold's bag, the one holding all their money. Harold shouted and immediately chased after him. A gunshot echoed. The bullet struck the ground right in front of the kid, stopping him instantly as he tripped and fell. Addie lowered her rifle and said she hadn't intended to hit him, but the warning was clear. Harold caught up, grabbed the kid, and took the bag back. The boy looked terrified, on the verge of tears. Addie's expression didn't soften, and even Harold felt a bit uneasy seeing how serious she looked. Up close, Harold noticed the kid's condition, dirty, worn clothes, and clearly not in a good situation. He asked if the boy needed money, but Addie cut in sharply, saying stealing was still wrong and shouldn't be excused. The kid tried to talk back, which only made the situation more tense. Then a woman ran over, calling out his name, Matsudo. She apologized repeatedly, saying she would discipline him properly. Harold told her it was fine since nothing was lost, but added that she needed to guide him better before he got into serious trouble. She quietly responded that she was trying. Matsudo suddenly shouted that if someone had money, everything could be fixed, and that he could help his father pay off their debts. Then he ran off again, his mother chasing after him. Harold watched them disappear and quietly said it looked like she was carrying far too much on her own. Addie replied that stories like that were common. Life kept hitting people without slowing down. Standing there wouldn't change anything, so they decided to find a place to stay for the night. It sounded simple, but it didn't go that way. Every inn they checked was either full or unavailable. One after another, they were turned away. After enough attempts, it started to feel like there was nowhere left. Camping wasn't an option either. Carrying that much money made sleeping outside too risky. Eventually, Adi spotted one last inn with a vacancy sign. They went in right away, and the clerk handed them a key, mentioning it was a small room with a double bed. When they stepped inside, small turned out to be an understatement. The space barely fit the bed, and everything felt cramped. Then, they both noticed the 2 pillows. The situation became obvious. Harold paused, trying to process it, then said he would go take a bath first. He just needed a moment to think. Adi misunderstood and assumed he meant something else entirely, which only made things more awkward. She decided to bathe too, partly because the room was so tight and she didn't want to cause discomfort. At one point, Harold casually leaned closer and mentioned she didn't smell bad at all. That only made things worse. Addie's face flushed instantly, and she rushed out of the room, leaving him confused about what he had done. Later, after his bath, Harold overheard two travelers talking. One mentioned that reaching the kingdom of Tawakul could take 1 or 2 months. The other said it had been years since he had been there but remembered it as a beautiful place. Then, the conversation shifted. They spoke more quietly about rumors that the Empire might be moving troops. If conflict started, travel routes could close. That made Harold think about the soldiers he had seen earlier. It didn't seem like a coincidence anymore. Still, since he planned to leave the continent soon, he didn't dwell on it too much. When he returned to the room, he dropped onto the bed, finally feeling how tired he was. There wasn't enough space for alternatives. The bed was the only real option. Logically, sharing it made sense. But actually doing it was a different matter. The door opened, and Addie came back from her bath, looking calmer but still a bit tense. She leaned in slightly and whispered, checking if he was asleep. For a moment, he pretended, but then instinctively reached out, caught her hand, and pulled her closer. Both of them froze. She stayed there quietly, leaning against him, while his thoughts started racing. One thing kept bothering him. Because of her situation, he worried she might feel like she had no choice in anything. That idea made him uncomfortable enough that he avoided thinking about it too deeply. Instead, he shifted the conversation, trying to move away from the moment. Addie softly hinted that she had hoped this night would feel special and that she wanted him to be gentle with her. But he didn't fully understand what she meant and ended up changing the topic completely, bringing up ship tickets instead. They started discussing the bestia again. It cost around 3 million rubes, was considered safe, and seemed like the most reasonable option. From a practical point of view, it made sense. So they agreed to buy tickets the next day? Addie nodded, but there was a slight hint of disappointment in her expression before she turned away and went to sleep. Harold assumed she was just tired. He lay down beside her, and after a bit of hesitation, gently put an arm around her. To him, it felt natural since they were sharing the same bed anyway. To her, it felt like he was close but still holding back in a way she didn't fully understand. Meanwhile, he was just confused about why everything felt so complicated. The next day, they went back to the ticket office. Harold paid for 2 tickets on the bestia. The clerk took the 2 8 million rubes and handed them their passes. The ship would depart in 5 days at noon, and they were allowed to board early, leave their belongings, and even stay in their assigned room. Missing departure meant losing everything. At the boarding gate, a crew member checked their tickets and paused when he saw their room number, 316. He commented that it was a great room, though he also mentioned he thought it had been unavailable before. Harold didn't think much of it. A good room was all he needed to hear. When they entered, both of them stopped for a second. The room was much larger than expected. There was actual space to move around, proper beds and a wide window. Addie immediately walked over to it, drawn by what she saw outside. Beyond the glass, fish drifted through clear blue water. That was when Harold realized the room was positioned below sea level. They weren't just on a ship. They were surrounded by the ocean itself. Addie pressed her hands lightly against the window, watching the fish move past. She quietly said it was beautiful, completely absorbed in the view. Harold watched Addie for a moment and chose not to interrupt. She looked genuinely happy, more than he had ever seen before, so he quietly stepped out to explore the ship and let her enjoy it. As he walked along the deck, someone called out to him. He turned and saw Seal jogging toward him. She smiled and mentioned they had ended up on the same ship. Harold casually replied that the other options didn't seem great. She seemed pleased by that and asked if he had seen her grandfather. He asked about Vaughn, and she said he was already asleep. Then, without much warning, she grabbed his hand and suggested they walk around the city together since they were now traveling on the same ship. Before he could question it, she was already pulling him along. They spent some time walking through the streets. She bought a crepe and offered him some, but he told her to finish it herself. She didn't argue and kept eating, completely relaxed. After a while, she brought up the carriage ride and mentioned that her grandfather seemed to like him. Harold said they hadn't spoken much, but she shook her head and explained that was exactly why it mattered. Vaughn didn't talk much to people he disliked, so even a short conversation meant something. Then, without warning, she drew her sword and swung at him. Harold reacted instantly. His body moved before his thoughts caught up. He raised his spear and blocked the strike. The sound of metal clashing echoed around them. She looked surprised, clearly impressed. Harold, on the other hand, was frustrated and told her that was dangerous. She calmly replied that if he hadn't reacted, she would have stopped before actually hitting him. He didn't seem convinced. She smiled, treating it like a simple test. Harold realized that dealing with her and her grandfather meant nothing was ever straightforward. She pointed out that he had blocked instead of dodged, meaning he had seen the attack clearly. Even when he tried to pass it off as luck, she didn't believe him. She explained that since her grandfather had taken interest in him, she wanted to see his ability for herself. To her, it was just a quick evaluation. Harold stood there, still trying to process the situation. What he thought would be a normal walk had turned into something else entirely. She assured him she wouldn't attack again, but he stayed cautious anyway. She laughed and told him to relax, then suggested they head back to the ship. Even when he tried to keep some distance, she stayed close, acting like nothing unusual had happened. At that moment, they heard a child screaming. Both of them turned and saw two suspicious men carrying a kid over their shoulder. Harold recognized him immediately. It was Matsudo, the same kid from before. Cecilia didn't hesitate. She ran straight after them. Harold followed right behind, knowing leaving her alone would only make things worse. As they ran, she casually told him that his kind face matched his personality, which somehow caught him more off guard than the sword earlier. The men jumped into a small boat and started rowing away. For a moment, it looked like they had gotten away, but Cecilia immediately grabbed another nearby boat and told Harold to get in. When he questioned it, she brushed it off, saying she would deal with it later, and started rowing after them without slowing down. They followed at a distance, and eventually reached a small island filled with large ships. The place didn't look right. It felt like a base for something illegal. Cecilia wanted to rush in right away, but Harold stopped her. He pointed out that charging in blindly would only get them caught. Instead, he scanned the area carefully and noticed another unattended boat nearby, confirming they weren't the only ones around. They moved into the nearby forest and tracked footprints leading toward a building. Cecilia almost tripped while moving forward, and Harold caught her before she fell. He pointed out the tracks, and even though she claimed she had already seen them, her reaction suggested otherwise. By the time they reached the building, rain had started pouring heavily, making everything feel tense and harder to navigate. Cecilia tried to head straight through the front, but Harold pulled her back and led her toward a side window instead. They slipped inside quietly and hid behind stacked barrels. Cecilia clearly disliked the approach, but Harold reminded her that their goal was to rescue the kid, not fight everyone inside. She reluctantly agreed and commented that he sounded like her grandfather. Soon, footsteps approached. A group of men entered, talking casually. They discussed what to do with Matsudo, treating him like an object rather than a person. One of them mentioned handing him over to their boss, while another made a disturbing remark about what the boss preferred. Hidden in the barrel, Harold listened carefully and started piecing things together. It seemed Matsudo had been caught trying to steal from them. When the men chased the group of kids, the others had run off, leaving him behind. Even by criminal standards, the situation felt worse than expected. Just when Harold thought things had calmed down a bit, one of the thugs suddenly paused and said something felt wrong. His eyes locked onto something sticking out of the barrel. It was Harold's spear. The entire group stared at it, confused. It was practically pointing at them like a signal. One of the men reached out to grab it, but another stopped him, saying they shouldn't touch someone else's weapon without permission. That hesitation ended up saving Harold and Cecilia from being exposed on the spot. After a short argument, the group lost interest and moved to another room. Once they were alone again, Cecilia whispered that a spear sticking out of a barrel looked incredibly suspicious and asked if he had seriously forgotten it. Harold quickly told her to drop it and stay quiet, clearly more focused on surviving than defending his mistake. When the footsteps faded, they carefully climbed out and started moving through the building. The place was larger than they expected, more like a maze than a simple hideout. They moved slowly, checking corners, until Harold spotted two thugs coming their way. He immediately pulled Cecilia into the nearest room. Inside, they found a strange pedestal with an egg resting on top. Cecilia looked at it curiously and asked what it was. Harold shrugged it off, saying it looked like nothing important. The moment she touched it, the egg began to shake. Cracks spread across the shell, and it suddenly broke open. A small creature popped out and instantly jumped straight into her clothes, as if it had found a hiding place. Cecilia let out a startled sound, louder than either of them wanted. Outside, the thugs reacted immediately, shouting about an intruder. Harold realized how bad the timing was. He quickly covered her mouth to keep her quiet while the creature kept moving around inside her clothes, making it hard for her to stay still. The thugs rushed in and looked around, but didn't see anyone. Instead, they noticed the broken egg. Their focus shifted instantly. They started panicking, saying the egg had hatched and that it belonged to their boss. One of them pointed out the broken shell and suggested the creature might be strong. The situation clearly mattered a lot to them. They searched the room but couldn't find anything, and eventually left, worried about what would happen if they failed to recover it. Once the room went quiet again, the small creature was still moving around inside Cecilia's clothes, making it impossible for her to relax. Cecilia's face flushed instantly as she whispered that the creature was moving around inside her clothes and asked him to get it out. Harold knew they didn't have time to hesitate. He kept one hand over her mouth so she wouldn't make noise and carefully reached in, trying to grab the creature. The situation turned awkward fast. She tensed up immediately, clearly embarrassed, while he struggled to catch something that wouldn't stay still. The creature kept wriggling around, making it harder for both of them to stay focused. It slipped lower, and her reaction made it obvious things were getting worse. He tried to stay calm and just deal with it quickly. After a brief struggle, he finally managed to grab the creature and pull it out. Both of them froze for a second, completely flustered. Outside, the thugs didn't notice anything. They kept searching the room, missing everything happening nearby, and eventually left, assuming the situation wasn't worth the trouble. Once things quieted down, Cecilia pointed out that he was still holding on to her. He let go immediately and apologized, saying it had been inappropriate. She quietly replied that she wasn't upset. In fact, she admitted she didn't mind him as much anymore, though she quickly brushed it off when he asked about it. Harold then looked at the small creature in his hand. It had a rocky body with a dragon-like head, almost strange but not threatening. It seemed calmer now. He asked if it could understand him, and it nodded. That surprised him. He offered to let it stay with them, and the creature reacted positively, as if it understood the offer. Cecilia, still recovering from everything that had just happened, said the creature made her uneasy. Harold didn't see it as dangerous and decided to keep it with him. They continued moving through the building, staying quiet and avoiding the people inside. After checking the lower levels, they made their way up and stopped outside the final room. Voices could be heard from inside. The tone was unsettling. Too soft, too calm for the situation. Someone inside kept speaking in a way that didn't feel right, making it clear something was wrong. Harold heard the boy's voice and realized it had to be Matsudo. So much for a quiet rescue. He let out a breath and told Cecilia they would have to go in directly. There was no time left for stealth. He explained the plan quickly. She would rush in, grab the kid, and get out. She immediately pushed back, saying it made more sense to fight together, especially since she was strong enough to handle it. He admitted that was exactly why he needed her to take the boy and leave. If he had to protect someone mid-fight, he wouldn't last. She hesitated, then agreed. He gave a quick nod, took a breath, and kicked the door open. Inside, everything stopped for a second. A massive spider-like woman stood over Matsudo, her form twisted between human and something far more dangerous. The boy was pleading while she treated him like he was nothing more than an object. Harold immediately understood the situation. The earlier mention of missing children wasn't just talk. He signaled Cecilia, and she moved instantly. The creature turned toward them, annoyed at the interruption. She explained that the boy had tried to steal something valuable from her, medicine worth over 50 million rubes, and that now he would pay for it. Her logic didn't make sense, but she spoke as if it did. She even admitted she had taken the medicine herself, simply because she could. That was enough. Harold stepped forward, gripping his spear tightly. Cecilia attacked first, slashing at the creature, but her strike barely made an impact. The spider-like woman reacted with irritation more than pain. Harold followed up, thrusting his spear, but it felt like hitting solid metal. The weapon lodged slightly, so he adjusted his stance and used his momentum to throw her off balance, sending her crashing into the wall. It didn't injure her much, but it created an opening. He shouted for Cecilia to take the boy and run. She grabbed Matsudo and moved immediately. Harold secured the vial of medicine while the creature reacted with anger, ordering her subordinates to chase them. The thugs rushed out after Cecilia. Harold watched them go, already confident they wouldn't be able to catch her. Then the room fell quiet. Every remaining enemy turned their attention toward him. The creature pointed at him and ordered them to deal with him first. Harold understood what that meant. He was now on his own. While Seal ran off with Matsudo, the remaining thugs rushed Harold all at once. One came in swinging, but Harold kicked him straight back into his own group, knocking several of them off balance. He followed up with a quick strike, driving his spear into another attacker's side. The fight quickly turned chaotic. It wasn't clean or controlled anymore, just constant movement, blocks, and counterattacks. Time blurred. His arms grew heavier, his breathing rougher, but he kept going while the thugs kept charging without thinking. Eventually, even they started to slow down. Seeing that, the spider-like woman lost patience. She called them off and decided to handle him herself. She fired a stream of corrosive webbing across the room. It hit one of her own men, and he collapsed, screaming as it ate through him. Harold paused for a split second, realizing she didn't care who got caught in it. The next attack came faster. He dodged, rolled, and barely avoided her legs striking down at him. The ceiling above cracked from the force, and rainwater began pouring in, turning the ground slick and unstable. He crouched briefly, trying to steady his breathing. She laughed, noticing he had slowed down. He responded that he was conserving energy, but she didn't take it seriously. He tightened his grip on the spear. As long as he could still use his final technique, he had a chance. But if his weapon failed before that, he wouldn't last much longer. She attacked again. He avoided it, but each movement drained more strength. His body was reaching its limit. Deciding it was time to end it, he turned to reposition himself, but his footing slipped on the wet ground. He hit the floor hard. The creature lunged toward him immediately. Then a gunshot cut through the storm. The bullet came from outside. In that exact moment, lightning struck it mid-air, turning it into a charged projectile. It slammed into the creature's body, releasing a surge of electricity. She let out a sharp scream as the current spread through her. Her body seized, then broke apart under the impact, collapsing instantly. The fight ended in a single moment. The remaining thugs looked at the aftermath, then at each other, and quickly decided they wanted no part of this anymore. They ran without hesitation, leaving everything behind. Harold stayed on the ground for a moment, trying to understand what had just happened. Then he looked out through the broken wall and saw Addie standing at a distance. She lowered her rifle. He got up and ran outside. The moment he reached her, she rushed forward and held onto him tightly, like she needed to confirm he was still there. She explained that she had guided lightning into her shot to increase its impact. It sounded unreal, but after everything he had seen, it didn't feel impossible. She added that she had placed a tracking spell on him earlier, which allowed her to know his position at all times. That was how she found him so quickly. He held her back and apologized for worrying her. She told him that next time, she would come with him no matter what. He didn't argue. Together, they returned toward the shore, where Seal was waiting with Matsudo. She called him slow at first, but then immediately noticed Addie and started asking questions. Harold cut that short, saying they needed to move first. The rain began to ease, making it possible to travel. They split into 2 boats and headed back. Partway through, Cecilia noticed something was wrong. Matsudo felt too cold. When she checked him, she saw dark marks spreading across his skin. Poison. Her expression changed instantly. Harold pulled out the medicine they had taken and said it should work. It had to. There were no other options. She tried to give it to him, but his body rejected it. She tried again, but nothing changed. The medicine didn't work. She called his name, shaking him, trying to get a response. But there was none. His body went still. They kept moving, but the silence between them grew heavy. When they reached the port, they returned the boat without saying much. After that, they buried him. Harold thought about the boy's mother, how she had been chasing after him earlier, calling his name, trying to keep him safe. She had wanted to protect him, to bring him home. Now she would never get that chance. To her, he would simply be missing. Cecilia placed a flower near the grave and quietly said she had wanted to save him. She didn't regret trying, but it still wasn't enough. Then she turned away, forcing herself to stay composed. That kind of mindset comes from living around danger for too long, where death starts feeling almost routine. Harold stepped back and gave Seal some space, then glanced at Addie, realizing both of them had already faced things like this before. He was the only one still struggling to process it all, like someone thrown into a situation he was never ready for. By the time they reached town near sunset, the weight of what happened hadn't left him. It stayed with him no matter how far they walked. Addie told him to stop blaming himself, saying there was nothing he could have done, and that being alive was what mattered most. Then suddenly, a woman rushed toward them, shaking and out of breath. She grabbed him and asked about Matsudo, saying her son had gone missing. She explained that her husband had just passed away too, and all he wanted was to see his son one last time. As she spoke, she collapsed to her knees. Harold froze. He remembered the boy running around, trying to find medicine to save his father, only to lose his own life in the process. Now, both of them were gone. The thought hit hard, and he kept replaying everything, wondering if anything could have changed the outcome, even though deep down he knew it couldn't. With a heavy voice, he admitted he didn't even know what the right answer was anymore. The woman apologized for bothering them and ran off again, still searching, refusing to give up. After that, days passed quietly on the ship. Nothing major happened. The incident slowly faded into the background, like so many tragedies that the world moves past without stopping. Life kept going, whether anyone was ready or not. To distract themselves, they talked about small things. Harold mentioned a strange stone he had picked up, and together they came up with a name for it. It was simple, but it helped, even if just a little. Still, the unease didn't fully go away. He kept thinking about how quickly everything could fall apart. His house, the fights, the people he couldn't save. It felt like things could change in an instant, and that thought stayed with him. Addie noticed the look on his face and asked what was wrong. He brushed it off, saying it was nothing, but she didn't accept that. She stepped closer, not giving him time to avoid it again. Before he could say anything else, she pulled him in and kissed him. For a moment, everything else faded. When they pulled apart, both of them were quiet, catching their breath. Then she softly told him that when someone carries too much weight inside, overthinking doesn't help. Sometimes it's better to just stay close to someone who understands. She didn't hesitate. She made it clear what she wanted. And that hit Harold so suddenly his mind just stalled for a second. He looked at her, almost unsure if this was really happening, and asked if she was certain. She nodded without doubt. He moved closer, still warning her that once things started, he might not be able to stop easily. But the tension between them had already built up too much. When they leaned into each other again, it wasn't rushed or chaotic. It felt like two people who had been holding everything in for too long finally letting it out. The moment softened as they stayed close. He moved carefully, unsure at first, while she held onto him tighter, like she didn't want distance anymore. The ship rocked gently around them, and for a while, everything else faded out. Eventually, things settled down. The intensity passed, and reality slowly returned. Later, when the ship started moving again, Harold sat there quietly, staring at his hands, trying to process what had just happened. For someone who usually overthinks every decision, he had acted without hesitation, and that alone felt strange to him. Then another thought hit him, heavier than the rest. He started wondering if she had truly meant it, or if her situation had influenced her choice. The idea that she might have felt obligated in some way unsettled him. It made the moment feel more complicated than it had before. He couldn't stop questioning it, whether it came from her own feelings or something else. The uncertainty bothered him enough that he decided to step away for a while. He walked along the deck trying to clear his head, even though he knew it wouldn't really solve anything. That's when someone called out to him. He turned and saw Vaughn sitting nearby, as if he had been there the whole time. The old man gestured for him to relax and said he just wanted to talk. He thanked Harold for looking after Seal, and then, unexpectedly, apologized about what happened with Matsudo. That caught Harold off guard. He hadn't expected that conversation to reach him at all. The old man, Vaughn, chuckled and said Seal was strong enough to handle herself anyway. Then he started talking about how strength, victory, and survival weren't the same thing. Someone could be strong and still lose, or win and still not survive what came after. He added that Seal had been acting a bit reckless lately, and hinted that Harold might be the one balancing her out. The way he said it made it clear he understood more than he was letting on. Then, without warning, he suggested they spar to clear Harold's mind. Before Harold could even react, people nearby gathered like they had been waiting for entertainment. Suddenly, it turned into a match. Wooden spear against wooden sword. Harold hesitated at first. Fighting an old man didn't feel right, but the moment Vaughn moved, that thought disappeared. His presence changed completely. The way he stepped forward, the control in his movements. It was clear this wasn't someone ordinary. When Vaughn revealed he had once been a sword sage, everything made sense. The fight began instantly. Harold barely had time to react before Vaughn closed the distance and struck him aside with overwhelming speed. It didn't feel like a casual spar. It felt like he was being tested against someone far beyond his level. Vaughn's movements became harder to track, almost like multiple versions of him were attacking at once. Harold relied on instinct just to keep up, blocking and countering when he could, while the crowd watched with excitement. It didn't last long. Eventually, Harold ended up on the ground, exhausted and bruised, realizing just how wide the gap was between them. Vaughn laughed lightly and asked if his head felt clearer now. After that, Harold had to admit it did. They sat down afterward, and Vaughn spoke more seriously. He said that worry and doubt were part of being human. Even at the peak of his strength, he had carried the same thoughts. According to him, people who claimed to have no worries were usually just avoiding responsibility. That stayed with Harold. Then Vaughn mentioned something more serious. He said a war was likely to break out on the northern continent. The Empire was using dark methods, experimenting with merging humans and demons. Hearing that, Harold immediately thought back to what they had faced earlier. It didn't feel like an isolated incident anymore. Vaughn admitted that he had left everything behind to protect Seal, though he still wasn't sure if it had been the right decision. Even someone like him carried doubts. Harold listened quietly, realizing that even the strongest people didn't have all the answers. Somehow, that made his own thoughts feel a little easier to handle. For someone who called himself retired, Vaughn had just given him a mix of advice, perspective, and a reality check all at once. Harold finally started to accept it. He had been holding everything in, trying to stay controlled while everything inside kept building up. Maybe it was fine to feel unsettled. Maybe that didn't mean he was failing. Later, as the ship passed a small island, he stepped into a shop near the port. Among simple items, a plain silver ring caught his attention. It reminded him of his old work as a silversmith, how even imperfect material could still be shaped into something meaningful with the right hands. The price was low, almost dismissive. That made the decision easier. Instead of just buying it, he asked for tools. The shopkeeper seemed amused but handed them over without question. When asked, Harold admitted he had spent 15 years working with silver. It didn't sound like pride. It sounded like something he hadn't thought about in a long time. Back in the room, he found Addie sitting on the bed, feeding the small creature they had picked up. She had already given it a name and was treating it like a pet. When she saw him, she smiled naturally, without any sign of anger. That made him hesitate more. He told her he wanted to apologize. She looked confused and asked what for. He explained that he felt like he might have pushed things too far the night before, unsure if he had handled it the right way. Before she could respond, he gently placed the ring on her finger. She looked down at it, surprised, studying it closely. She asked if he had bought it for her. He shook his head and said he made it himself. Then, almost awkwardly, he started explaining things about silver, how it was said to protect against certain things, how it had uses beyond decoration. She laughed lightly at that and teased him, then looked back at him more softly. She told him she hadn't felt forced. To her, the moment had been meaningful. She said she had been happy, that he had been careful with her, and that it was something she would remember in a good way. Harold just stood there for a second, completely thrown off. Nothing about this felt like it should be happening to someone like him, and yet it was. Before he could even sort through his thoughts, Adi pushed him back onto the bed. her expression playful rather than serious, like she was tired of him overthinking everything. She leaned in, teasing him, saying that if he still doubted her, she would just prove it again. The mood this time was different, lighter, almost joking. When they kissed, it didn't feel heavy or tense like before. It felt warm, easy, like they were both finally relaxing instead of carrying everything on their shoulders. He tried to hold himself back out of embarrassment, but it didn't last long. She asked if he was ready, smiling in a way that made it clear she wasn't forcing anything, just inviting him to stop thinking so much. Even the small creature nearby went still, like it didn't belong in the moment at all. After thinking about it for a bit, he decided it didn't really matter. What mattered was that he had finally escaped his old life. Still, he couldn't stop thinking about his mom. He wondered if she might be in Fukuoka and thought maybe he should head there first. But at the same time, this was the first time he had ever felt truly free from that painful past. The next morning, he stepped out of his van holding a cup of coffee, stretching as he yawned. When he looked toward the sea, he noticed something strange. A girl standing there with long ears and a sword in her hand. She suddenly turned and faced him. For a second, he thought he was imagining things. Growing up, he had never had a normal childhood. His family always made him work for them, so seeing something like this felt unreal. He rubbed his eyes just to make sure. His first thought was simple. She looked incredibly cute. Then he noticed her ears. That made him wonder if she was some kind of monster too. But honestly, he didn't care much. That thought quickly got pushed aside because of how charming she looked. She suddenly looked away, a bit startled. His heart started racing for no clear reason, and he casually assumed it might be love at first sight. On her side, she seemed confused, as if she had been transported into another world. She greeted him politely and commented on how nice the morning breeze felt. He awkwardly asked if she wanted to have breakfast together. Then he pointed at her weapon and casually mentioned that carrying a blade like that without permission was illegal. He even added that she might get in trouble if someone reported her. She didn't respond. She just stared at him. At that moment, several monsters quietly appeared behind him. She calmly noted that those pig-headed creatures had made it here too. That's when he finally realized something was wrong. He slowly turned, saw them, and immediately muttered in fear that this was happening again. In his mind, it felt like Japan was completely finished. One of the large pig-headed monsters swung its axe at him. He barely managed to dodge, but another one grabbed him by the neck and pulled him close, its disgusting breath hitting his face. Even in that moment, he complained that it smelled awful. Before things could get worse, the girl moved instantly and cut the monster down. He was freed, coughing a bit, and casually thanked her while wiping blood off his face, somehow still holding onto his coffee. She looked around, surprised at how many monsters were showing up. Then she turned to him and urgently told him in her own language to find somewhere safe and hide. He didn't understand her words, but from her expression, he guessed she was telling him to run. He grabbed her hand and tried to pull her toward the van, telling her to escape with him. She immediately pushed his hand away and insisted that he should be the one to hide. Then her body started to glow. She stepped forward and declared that she would fight them. She called the creatures evil and announced that she would wipe them out using her power. Her sword lit up with a bright cross-shaped glow, and the energy around her felt incredibly strong. He didn't fully understand what was going on, but the light from her sword was clearly damaging the monsters. The smaller ones started screaming and covering themselves as their bodies burned. Still, he noticed that the big one barely reacted. That's when his eyes shifted toward his van and an idea hit him. The girl quickly took down the smaller monsters, cutting through them one by one, then rushed toward the giant. But the moment she attacked, things went wrong. Her sword got knocked away, and the monster grabbed her, lifting her up like she weighed nothing. It mocked her, saying her weapon wasn't even fully awakened yet, and called her arrogant. Then it said something far worse, threatening her in a disgusting way. Before it could do anything, a loud crash interrupted everything. The van slammed straight into the monster, forcing it back and freeing her. She dropped safely onto the ground. Back in Tokyo, inside the garage near Shin's home, the place was filled with dead bodies of goblins and pig-like creatures. One of the men looked around and commented on how many there were. Another guy, smoking calmly, asked what they were supposed to do with all the corpses. The old man replied that they would burn most of them nearby. As for the bigger ones, he casually mentioned they could be used as food. That shocked the others, but the topic quickly shifted to Shin. Someone asked how he was doing. The smoker shrugged and said he had tried calling, but there was no answer, so maybe he was already dead. The old man didn't believe that for a second. He confidently said Shin couldn't die that easily, calling him the best result of everything he had built. He then continued cutting apart one of the monster bodies, saying that even if there were dozens or hundreds of these creatures, they were nothing compared to Shin. Back at the beach, the giant monster slowly stood up again. Without wasting time, Shin jumped out of the van. Before the monster could react, he rushed in and slashed off its legs with a knife. The creature collapsed, screaming in pain. He casually told the girl that carrying large weapons usually required special permission, then showed his own dagger, mentioning there was more inside his van, so she didn't need to worry about rules or laws right now. She didn't respond. The monster tried to crawl away, but Shin didn't give it a chance. He cut off its arms next, watching closely as it struggled. He noted how similar its body structure was to a human's, then stabbed both of its eyes without hesitation. Back in the garage, the old man talked about how their family had spent 300 years passing down killing techniques, and how Shin had mastered all of them. On the beach, Shin sat on top of the dying monster. His face looked strangely calm, almost like he was thinking about something else. He told the girl that everything was under control now, but then something strange started happening. The monster's body began to disappear, slowly breaking apart. The girl immediately shouted a warning, realizing that something about this wasn't normal at all. She quickly grabbed her sword and drove it straight into the monster's heart. As Shin stepped back, he noticed something strange. The limbs he had cut off were already growing back. He quietly figured it out. It wouldn't die unless its heart was destroyed or its head was completely removed. The girl looked at him, and he casually asked where she had learned to use a sword. He admitted that he wasn't really skilled with one himself and was more used to things like bats or daggers. Midway through talking, he stopped, realizing she probably didn't understand a single word. He scratched his head awkwardly and pointed out that he couldn't understand her either. Then he wondered if there was any way they could communicate. For a moment, he just stood there thinking. He had barely ever spoken to a girl outside his own family, so he had no idea how to handle this situation. After overthinking it, he gave up and decided it didn't matter if she understood him or not. He figured he might as well just say it. Gathering what little courage he had, he told her that he liked her. To him, it really felt like love at first sight. He placed a hand on his chest, dropped to one knee, and asked her to marry him. She froze, clearly shocked. He laughed nervously, scratching his cheek, but then stopped when he noticed her expression didn't change. She softly repeated the word, marry, as if she actually understood it. That caught him off guard. He wondered if she had somehow understood what he said. Suddenly, her sword began to glow. She realized something and said that a seal had just been broken. Shin instinctively raised his arms as the light shot toward him. She quickly tried to stop it, saying something felt wrong. The light pierced straight into his head. He cried out in pain as it spread through him. After a few moments, everything went quiet again. The glow faded, and he staggered slightly, holding his head. Confused, he asked her what that light even was. She spoke again, but this time something different happened. A strange screen appeared in front of him, showing her words in a language he could understand. She explained that she hadn't expected the contract to form with someone from another world. He stared at the floating text, confused, and asked what exactly he was looking at. She seemed just as puzzled, wondering if it was some kind of subtitle system. When she spoke again, the words appeared once more on the screen. She explained that because of the contract, they could now understand each other through this interface. She even showed that she could read his words the same way. He looked at it carefully and said it felt like reading text on a screen. She agreed, then added that she was surprised he knew the chant required to form the contract. He immediately denied it, saying there was no way he knew anything like that. But she calmly told him that he had already said it. Then she repeated his earlier confession, the words he had used when he asked her to marry him. His face instantly turned bright red. He smacked his forehead, then quickly covered his ears, completely overwhelmed by embarrassment. He tried to explain himself, saying he only said those things because he thought she wouldn't understand him. Realizing what just happened, he panicked even more. connecting the dots that his words had actually worked as a chant in her language, basically the same as proposing marriage. He couldn't believe it and loudly questioned how something like that was even possible. She calmly addressed him as someone from another world and explained that their conversation history could be tracked. As she swiped through the floating window, his over-the-top confession showed up clearly. Looking at it, she said she could now fully understand what he had said earlier. That was too much for him. He grabbed his head in embarrassment and almost collapsed, rolling on the ground from how awkward it felt. She then broke it down in a simple way. He just happened to appear where she was transported, happened to save her, happened to show strong affection toward her, and somehow ended up forming a contract with the Holy Sword. Then she questioned if all of that could really be just coincidence. He stayed quiet for a moment, still blushing, then denied it, and said it wasn't coincidence, it was fate. She paused at that, then quietly accepted his feelings. That caught him completely off guard. She raised her sword in front of her and looked at it seriously. Then she asked if he would be willing to save the worlds that had been destroyed, including her people. The window labeled him as the chosen hero of the Holy Sword. He looked confused, repeating the word hero like it didn't belong to him. She nodded and pointed out how he had taken down the monster so easily with just a dagger. To her, his strength was way beyond normal. She even assumed he must already be a well-known hero in this world. He immediately shook his head and denied it. He said he wasn't anything like that. The only reason he could fight like that was because of his past. He had been raised as a tool for his family's dark work. He pulled out his dagger and explained that heroes were like the ones in games, people chosen to defeat some great evil. Then he tossed the dagger aside, saying he was nothing like that. If anything, he felt like the complete opposite, someone far worse. But she didn't agree. She told him he was wrong. He looked at her, surprised. She clenched her fist and explained that being a hero wasn't some special title or job. To her, it was simply a way to survive. She explained that being able to face fear head-on was what survival meant for people like her. It wasn't just about fighting, it was a way of living. With a soft smile, she added that this was exactly the kind of person she wanted to become. Hearing that, he grabbed his hoodie near his chest, clearly flustered. He awkwardly said it felt like they were both kind of into each other and everything was moving way too fast. Still, he nervously asked if she would consider becoming his lover. Right after saying it, he shut his eyes and tried to take it back, laughing it off and apologizing, blaming his weird behavior on everything crazy that had been happening. But then he stopped. She had quietly agreed. He froze. She called him Hiro-sama with a gentle smile and said she wanted to be his lover. The way she looked at him made his face heat up again, and he scratched his cheek, not knowing how to react. Trying to calm himself, he stepped back a bit and said they hadn't even introduced themselves properly. He told her to just call him Shin. She introduced herself as Ingrid. For a moment, he genuinely wondered if all of this was just a dream. Someone like her choosing him didn't feel real at all. His mind drifted back. The first time he was forced to kill something, it was a pig. He had asked if it was for food, but his parents told him it wasn't. It was just training, getting used to killing. In his family, once a child turned 5, they were put through monthly training. He couldn't do it at first. The piglet looked too innocent, but his siblings didn't hesitate at all. Watching them made him feel weak, like he didn't belong. After 4th grade, he barely had a normal life. He spent most of his time helping with the family's work and going through more training. He never made friends, never even got close to having a relationship. The only people around him were his family. The books he read were old and outdated. TV and internet were completely off limits until he turned 18. His siblings accepted all of it like it was normal, but he never did. Whenever he got the chance to go outside for work, he tried to understand how other people lived, and slowly, he realized just how messed up his own life had been. Compared to others his age, he felt like he had the worst childhood, and yet somehow, he ended up here. Ingrid gently held his head and asked him to lower it a bit. Without thinking, he dropped to his knees. His mind went wild for a second. He thought she was about to kiss him and panicked internally, telling himself he had to stay calm and not mess this up. He closed his eyes and braced himself, but instead of a kiss, she leaned closer and softly whispered something near his forehead. She told him that since he had formed a contract with the Holy Sword of Signel, she would now grant him her blessing, According to her, the sword now belonged to him alone. A glowing mark briefly appeared on his forehead, then vanished like it had never been there. She held the sword out toward him and asked him to take it, saying he needed to defeat Erold, the one responsible for bringing disaster to her world. He quietly thought about it and said that if a sword existed to kill, then defeat clearly meant ending that man's life. She didn't hesitate. She confirmed that was exactly what she meant. She added that Erold wasn't even human anymore, since he had used some forbidden method. Before she could explain further, he cut her off and told her to leave it to him. With a soft, almost playful tone, he reminded her that she was his first lover and asked if she really thought he would refuse a request from her. She gently replied that she wouldn't, and thanked him for accepting. As he turned away, though, something started bothering him. He wondered if he had just taken advantage of the situation to make her accept him. He quickly shook that thought off, telling himself that couldn't be true. He wasn't that kind of person. He said that regardless of anything else, even if she hadn't accepted him, he still would have gone after Erold. Then he smiled faintly and added that killing was the only thing he was truly good at. She didn't respond. That silence made him uneasy. He wondered if he had said something wrong. Suddenly, he felt a sharp pain in his chest and grabbed at it. She immediately asked what was wrong. He admitted that he had grown up in a very unusual environment. The whole reason he was here was to run away from that past. He had believed that simply leaving would help him change. But hearing himself speak now, he realized nothing had really changed. Becoming a normal person still felt out of reach. That realization hurt more than anything. He admitted, deep down, he really hated himself. Still, at the same time, he genuinely wanted to change. Ingrid calmly told him that he was already amazing. She said he had saved her with his strength and courage, and that was why she chose to stand by his side. To her, he didn't need to become someone else. She told him he was already good enough. He hesitated and pointed out that the strength she was praising came from his ability to kill. He even asked if that didn't disgust her. She shook her head and explained that, in her eyes, a warrior who understood and trusted his own abilities was someone worthy of respect. Then she told him they needed to move. He asked where they were going. She explained that they had to head southeast. If they traveled by horse, it would take around 7 days. Their people had been captured and were being held in the capital, a place called Azeroth. He frowned slightly, saying he had never heard of it, and wondered how a journey like that would even work from here. She suddenly remembered something and said she could use the holy sword to show him a map. Lifting the sword into the air, she activated it, and a massive glowing map appeared out of nowhere. He stared at it, impressed, saying it was amazing that the sword could even do something like this. But then his expression changed. He pointed out that the map looked exactly like Japan. When he noticed a glowing point, he asked if that was supposed to be Azeroth. A second later, it hit him. That location was actually Tokyo. He couldn't believe it and wondered how things had ended up like this. She looked confused, so he explained that Tokyo was the city he grew up in, full of tall buildings and known as the capital of the country. He added that he had been living there just 2 days ago until monsters suddenly appeared and turned everything into chaos. She calmly said that was exactly where she needed to go. He quickly stopped her and tried to make sense of it. If Tokyo and her capital, Azel, were in the same place, then that meant both worlds shared the same layout. She confirmed it. According to her, their world and his world were like two sides of the same coin. They influenced each other in many ways, and their geography was almost identical. That meant Tokyo and Azel were essentially the same location, just in different worlds. Because of that connection, whatever disaster happened in her world had started affecting his as well. He looked at her, trying to process everything. She turned toward him, her eyes slightly teary, and explained that the one behind all this, the warlock Erold, had used a forbidden type of magic. Her voice trembled as she said it was meant to connect the world of the living with the afterlife. That made him realize just how serious the situation was. He turned back to the map and noticed several other glowing points. Aside from Tokyo, there were 5 more. He asked about them. She explained that those were the locations of sacred shrines, each holding one of the 6 sacred treasures given by a god: the holy sword, spear, axe, shield, staff, and bow. These treasures were what maintained balance and peace between the two worlds. But Erold and his followers had sealed those treasures one by one. In their place, They had installed corrupted versions, demonic weapons granted by an evil god. The demon sword, spear, axe, shield, staff, and bow had replaced the originals. Because of that, the balance between the worlds had completely collapsed. That collapse was the reason behind all the strange events happening in his world. She added that among all those weapons, the strongest one, the demon sword, was located at the very place he had just mentioned, Tokyo, and the one wielding it was Arold himself. She explained that the demon sword's power was overwhelming, and that area, Tokyo, was probably where the strange phenomena were the most intense. He asked about other places, pointing out that even where they were right now, weird things were already happening. She touched the map and said that she had crossed into his world using the Holy Sword's power. But the orcs, who served Arold, had followed her because of the influence of a nearby demon weapon. She pointed at a glowing mark on the map and said it was right there. He recognized the location immediately. It was Nakazawa City in Ishikawa Prefecture, near the Noto Peninsula. Realizing how close they were, he started to piece things together. She explained that this place held the shrine of Kirby's, where the demon axe was sealed. Then she turned to him with a serious expression and suggested that they should deal with that weapon first. She wondered if he could use his power to seal it. As he thought about it, she continued, "Instead of heading straight to the capital and facing Arold right away, it would be smarter to seal the other demon weapons first and weaken him." She admitted that it would have been impossible for her alone. But now, with him by her side, things were different. He looked back at the map and connected the dots. The other glowing points had to be the locations of the remaining demon weapons. She confirmed it. Each mark represented a shrine holding one of them: the demon spear, shield, staff, and bow. At that moment, another screen popped up in front of them. He was surprised to see a new window appear, clearly listing each shrine and its location: demon sword, Tokyo, demon axe, Nakazawa, demon spear, Kyoto, demon bow, Oto, demon shield, Osaka, demon staff, Nagoya. She noticed and said his thoughts were being displayed, impressed at how quickly he was getting used to the system. He admitted the interface was actually pretty amazing. Looking at the map, he traced a path connecting the locations. From where they were, the closest stops would be Nakazawa and Osaka. In simple terms, they needed to move west across Honshu. He suggested they visit each shrine along the way, seal the demon weapons one by one, and leave Tokyo for last, where they would face Arold. She looked at him, clearly impressed, and said she didn't expect anything less. The way he understood everything so quickly surprised her. Not long after, she found herself sitting beside him inside his van as he drove through quiet, empty streets. She looked around in amazement and asked if the vehicle moved on its own. He laughed lightly, glad she seemed to be enjoying herself. Then he asked if she wanted to feel what it was like when he opened the window. As the breeze flowed in, she smiled, saying the wind felt nice. The van suddenly drifted off the road for a second, snapping him back to reality. He quickly focused on driving again, then stole a quick glance at her. She looked completely at ease, enjoying the wind brushing against her face. Seeing that made him unexpectedly happy. To him, it all felt unreal. Just a short while ago, his life was a mess, and now he was driving around with a cute girlfriend, just the two of them. On top of that, they were about to travel across Japan together in his van. He started imagining visiting different places, eating good food, and spending time with her. Then he abruptly cut off his thoughts. He scolded himself for being careless. She was dealing with something serious, and here he was, getting distracted. He reminded himself that his priority should be helping her with everything he had. She noticed him staring and asked if something was wrong. He brushed it off, saying it was nothing. Then he changed the topic and asked if she was hungry. She hesitated a bit before admitting she was a little. He suggested they stop by a store along the highway to grab something to eat, but at the same time, he started wondering if stores were even still open. He couldn't tell what kind of state Japan was in right now. If these strange events had spread everywhere, things could already be in chaos. If that was the case, traveling by car might not even be possible for long. To figure things out, he turned on the small TV inside the van. A reporter appeared, saying they were showing live footage of the National Diet Building captured by a drone because it was too dangerous to get close. Then the reporter's voice shifted in shock. There was a massive creature perched on top of the building. something that looked like a dragon. Ingrid quietly identified it as a royal wyvern. The camera zoomed in, showing two massive statues standing guard at the entrance. They were enormous, easily around 10 meters tall. She told him those were Ira and Lyra. He asked if she knew them, and she confirmed it. They used to be guardian beasts of her royal family, but now they were under Errold's control. That made him pause. If she was talking about a royal family, then she might actually be a princess. On the screen, the statues suddenly moved. The reporter panicked, shouting that their eyes had started glowing and that they were coming to life. The two giants slowly lowered themselves, almost like they were bowing to something. As the dust cleared, several figures appeared in front of them. There were 8 people, all wearing dark hoods. They hadn't been there before. They just appeared out of nowhere. He asked Ingrid who they were. She explained that they were part of Errold's cult, a group of sorcerers who served him and worshipped dark gods. The figures began to glow. Before anything else could be shown, the broadcast suddenly cut off, ending with the reporter's scream. Moments later, the screen switched back to the news anchor, continuing coverage of the situation around the National Diet Building. She apologized, saying the footage couldn't continue since all the drones had been destroyed. Shin turned to her, clearly uneasy, and asked what they had just seen. She answered simply, "It was magic." He placed a hand near his chin, thinking it through. To him, it looked like Tokyo had already been taken over by something from another world. After that, they started gathering more information online. Surprisingly, there were still plenty of survivors, and social media was full of updates. From everything they found, the situation became clearer. Members of the National Diet had been taken hostage by Errold's cult. Because of that, neither the police nor the self-defense forces could act recklessly. The Tokyo governor and other officials were now operating under the cult's control. Tokyo itself had been placed under lockdown, and the rest of the country was being managed by regional authorities. Ingrid pointed out that it seemed Errold was focusing entirely on taking control of the capital first. Shin added that, because of that, areas outside Tokyo didn't seem to have as many monsters or disturbances. That meant their journey might go more smoothly than expected. Still, he asked if there was a chance those creatures could come after her again. She explained that since she had crossed into the human world, it would be difficult for enemies from her world to track her exact location. To send creatures across worlds required powerful magical artifacts, and it wasn't something they would waste lightly. However, she admitted there was still some uncertainty. If the power of those artifacts grew stronger, things could change. He told her not to think too negatively for now and suggested they focus on something simple, like getting food. As he looked ahead, he spotted a roadside sushi place with a big fish sign and pointed it out, saying it was worth trying. She looked confused, so he tried to explain the size of sushi with his fingers, making a small gap. At the same time, he thought about how much harder her situation must be compared to his. Even so, he wanted to cheer her up, even if just a little. She asked if it was something they could eat, and he said he hoped she'd like it. As he drove, he realized they were already close to Kanazawa. Since they were stopping anyway, he decided they might as well enjoy themselves a bit. When they reached Kanazawa, he told her this area was famous for sushi, especially in the Hokuriku region. It was also a good place to use as a base while they explored nearby locations. He suggested they start with a meal, then move on to investigating the shrine afterward. She agreed without hesitation. Then he paused and asked what they should do about the holy sword she was carrying. He pointed out that walking around with a sword like that would instantly get them in trouble with the police. She calmly told him not to worry. Then, without hesitation, she tossed the sword into the air and chanted something. A small window appeared showing the word, "Cancelled." The sword began to glow, shrinking down until it became a small pendant that fit neatly in her palm. She explained that this was the sword's true form. Then she handed it to him and told him to wear it, adding that he could turn it back into a weapon whenever needed. He looked impressed and said it was actually pretty convenient. After that, he suggested she should probably change clothes, since her current outfit would stand out too much. He offered to lend her something and awkwardly added that her ears were cute, but definitely noticeable. She reassured him again and said it wouldn't be a problem. A magic circle appeared behind her, light surrounding her body as she cast a spell. In an instant, her ears changed, blending into a normal human appearance. She mentioned that she could transform into several different forms if needed. He stared at her, genuinely amazed. A little while later, she stepped out of the van after changing. He was leaning casually against it when he turned and saw her. She hesitated and asked if she looked strange, wondering if she could pass as normal now. Wearing his hoodie, she looked completely different. He immediately gave her a thumbs up and said she looked great and fit in perfectly. Inside his head, though, he was completely losing it over how cute she looked. They walked over to a nearby sushi restaurant. He mentioned that he had heard it was pretty popular, and it looked like they might have to wait a bit. He asked if she was okay with that. She smiled and said she didn't mind at all, adding that talking with him would make the wait easy. That made him smile too, though internally he was starting to feel like this was dangerous. She was just too charming. At one point, she started spinning her arms and body, trying to figure out how the rotation worked, which made him laugh. Even with everything going on, he couldn't help but feel lucky. As they moved through the line and into the restaurant, neither of them noticed a large man dressed in black nearby, quietly observing the place and muttering about wanting to try the raw fish. Inside, the chef greeted them warmly, and they took their seats. Shin watched her with a soft smile as she looked around in amazement at the dishes moving in front of her. She asked what exactly she was seeing. He pointed to the conveyor belt and explained that the sushi kept circulating, and anything that passed by would eventually come back around again. He explained that since the dishes kept moving around on the belt, that's why it was called conveyor belt sushi. She carefully asked if it was okay to just take the food without asking anyone first. He reassured her that it was completely fine and said he would order a few good options for her to try. Within seconds, several plates arrived in front of them. The staff thanked them for waiting, and she stared at the food in amazement. He pointed at one of the plates and told her to start with that. She picked up a piece with her chopsticks and slowly took a bite. He watched her closely, waiting for her reaction, and asked if it tasted good. But instead of answering, tears suddenly started rolling down her cheeks. He panicked and asked what was wrong, quickly apologizing, thinking maybe the taste was too strong for her. She gently set her chopsticks down, wiped her tears, and apologized. Then she explained that it wasn't bad at all, she was just deeply moved. It was her first proper meal in this world, and it made her feel overwhelmed in a good way. She thanked him sincerely, holding her plate, and said it was really delicious. Hearing that, he smiled quietly, thinking that he wanted to make her truly happy no matter what. After they finished eating, the chef casually asked Ingrid where she was from. Both of them were caught off guard, but the chef quickly told them not to worry. He explained that he often met customers from different countries, so he could usually tell when someone wasn't local. Shin realized that Ingrid's way of speaking probably sounded foreign to others too, just like it had to him at first. Trying to cover it up, he casually explained that she was an exchange student from somewhere in Europe. The chef nodded and said that made sense, mentioning that her speech sounded similar to languages from that region. Then the chef pointed toward another customer sitting nearby and asked if that person was also with them. Shin turned to look. The man was sitting alone, surrounded by empty plates, muttering to himself in a strange language. He suddenly pointed aggressively at something on the menu, demanding more food. Shin quietly asked Ingrid who that guy was, but she didn't answer. Instead, she stayed silent, her expression turning serious. Shin kept watching the man. As he listened carefully, a translation window started appearing again, showing what the man was saying. The man was going on about how unbelievably delicious the food was, wondering what the white grains were, and being amazed at how good raw fish could taste. He even said he felt glad to be alive. Shin's eyes narrowed. Those words felt familiar, almost exactly like what Ingrid had said earlier. That's when it clicked. This man wasn't normal. He was from another world too. Right beside him, Ingrid quietly said that this area might already be under enemy control. Based on what she could sense, there was a high chance that man was one of Arold's followers. She warned him that if that man noticed them, it could lead to a fight. But Shin stayed calm. He said it didn't look like the guy had noticed anything yet. Then he told her to quietly leave the restaurant first and wait outside. She nodded and slipped out without drawing attention. A moment later, he stood up too and signaled for the bill. The staff member came over with a smile and told him the total, asking him to pay at the register. Even while walking to the counter, he kept an eye on the strange man. After paying, he left the restaurant. Outside, everything seemed normal at first. A few kids were gathered near a fish tank watching the fish swim around. One of them suddenly pointed out that one fish was floating strangely. A nearby woman wondered if it had died. Then something felt off. Smoke started coming out of the fish. The glass tank suddenly shattered. Ingrid turned toward the noise just as a child screamed for his mother. The fish dropped onto the ground, and then stood up. Its body twisted into something unnatural. It grew legs, its mouth stretching wide to reveal human-like teeth. The creature drooled as it stared at them. The mother and child froze in fear as the monster lunged toward them. Ingrid reacted instantly, pulling them both out of the way just in time. But that left her exposed. The creature shifted its focus and attacked her instead. She fell back, defenseless for a moment. Right then, Shin rushed in and slammed a nearby signpost into the monster, knocking it away. She got back up, and he asked what that thing even was. She admitted she didn't know for sure, but said it might mean the gate was starting to open. People around them began to panic and gather at a distance. She urgently told him to draw the holy sword and defeat it before anyone else got hurt, but he refused. He explained that pulling out a weapon like that in public would immediately get him arrested. On top of that, if he revealed it, that suspicious man from earlier might figure out who she really was. Still, he turned to her and said it would be fine. He told her he'd handle it. Then he stepped forward toward the monster alone. His mind immediately switched into analysis mode. He estimated its weight based on its build, probably around 380 kilograms or more. If those claws hit a vital area, it would be fatal. He tried to break it down. Its durability, weak points, chances of winning. Then he clicked his tongue, realizing there was no way to know all that for sure, but he focused on what he could see: eyes, mouth, flesh. Despite being from another world, it still had the traits of a living creature. And from what he had already seen earlier, these things weren't invincible. That was enough. He decided to test everything he had learned so far, every skill, every instinct. Right here, the fish monster lunged at him, trying to bite him whole, but Shin kept dodging at the last second. Every move was sharp and calculated, his body reacting almost instinctively. From a distance, the man in black watched him with clear interest. The monster attacked again, but Shin stepped aside, making it crash straight into the road. The impact cracked the concrete, proving just how strong it was. Still, Shin had already figured something out. The creature's blind spot was right underneath it. He knew he wouldn't get many chances. Grabbing a chunk of broken concrete, he tightened his grip. This had to work in one shot. He slid under the monster's body and slammed the rock straight into its eye, twisting it with force. The creature let out a painful screech and pulled back violently. Shin stepped away, thinking that was enough. At least it could feel pain. That meant it wasn't unstoppable. He tossed the broken concrete aside and shouted at everyone nearby to run. He warned them that the creature was dangerous, and the crowd quickly started dispersing in panic. He turned to Ingrid and told her they should leave too, while they still could. She tried to say something, but the sound of approaching sirens cut her off. He told her it would be fine, and that the police would handle things from here, but then the man in black from earlier approached them. He casually called out, telling them to wait, and praised Shin for what he had just done. Neither Shin nor Ingrid turned around. Shin quietly said that things had gotten troublesome now that this guy had noticed them. Ingrid suggested they ignore him and leave immediately. They started moving, but the man called out again, louder this time. Then he suddenly realized something. It seemed like they couldn't understand him. At that exact moment, the fish monster tried to attack him from behind. Without even turning properly, the man threw a single punch. The impact alone blew the monster apart, just like that. He calmly said he almost felt bad for it, but it shouldn't have interfered. Then he turned back to Shin and praised him again, saying his performance had been impressive. He pointed at him and said he wanted to talk. He described Shin as a skilled fighter, someone who had clearly defeated many enemies before. That made Shin hesitate for a second. But Ingrid quickly snapped him out of it by pulling his hand and telling him to run. As they pushed through the crowd, Shin asked if what they saw was magic. She confirmed it. It was powerful and unusual. Behind them, the man's expression darkened as he questioned why they were running. Shin tried to process what he had seen. The way the punch exploded on impact, it was almost like it ignited. He asked if magic could really do something like that. She explained that it was likely fire magic applied directly to the fist, something only highly skilled magic users could pull off. That made him realize something. This guy wasn't normal, he was dangerous. Ingrid added that there was a high chance he was one of Arold's mages. Shin quickly realized the situation was getting worse. If that man really was connected to Arold, then it meant they had been tracked all the way from Tokyo. Ingrid said that was very likely. He clicked his tongue and told her they couldn't afford to mess this up. He immediately told her to head to the van and get ready to leave the city. They paused for a second to check if the man was still behind them. At first, it looked like he wasn't there, but Shin's expression didn't relax at all. He said something felt wrong. They were still being followed. Even though he couldn't see the guy anymore, he could tell from the sound of footsteps. The man had been wearing heavy boots, and the rhythm of those steps was distinct. Shin explained that even without seeing him, he could tell the guy was tracking them perfectly. To him, it felt like being hunted by a trained dog. Ingrid quietly wondered if her identity had been exposed, but Shin shook his head. He believed the man's interest wasn't in her. It was in him, the one who fought the fish monster. Meanwhile, the man calmly continued walking, already closing in. Soon he spotted Shin again. Shin was standing casually in front of a shop, talking to the shopkeeper like nothing was wrong, even commenting on the food like he was just another customer. The man smirked, thinking he had finally caught up. The shopkeeper cheerfully recommended the item Shin pointed at, saying it tasted great whether grilled or stewed. Shin played along and said he'd try it. Not far away, Ingrid stood quietly, hidden under the hoodie, staying out of sight. Then the man spoke. He asked, in his own language, if Shin could understand him. For a split second, Shin tensed, but he immediately acted clueless. He turned around, scratching his cheek, and asked if the man was talking to him. He casually asked if he was a foreigner and apologized, saying he didn't understand English. He even suggested the man should talk to the shopkeeper instead. The shopkeeper tried to help, saying she could speak a little English because of foreign customers, but then admitted she didn't recognize the language at all. Shin added that maybe it wasn't English after all. The man looked confused. He muttered that when their eyes met earlier, he was sure they understood each other. Now he started doubting himself. Shin, on the other hand, was certain this man was chasing him for a reason, but at least one thing was clear. The man didn't know about Ingrid. That gave him an opening. He decided to draw the attention completely toward himself, letting the man catch up on purpose while keeping Ingrid out of it. But every time he used the skills he learned from his family, he felt that same discomfort in his chest. Still, it worked. The man stood there, deep in thought, unsure. Shin gave an awkward laugh, waved casually, and said he should have studied English better before walking off. Just as he was about to leave, the man suddenly called out for him to stop. Ingrid, who had quietly moved closer from behind, also froze at that moment. The man suddenly pulled out a pendant, one that looked almost identical to the one Ingrid had given Shin. He activated it, and just like before, a glowing window appeared in front of him. Ingrid's expression changed immediately. Shin pointed at it, and the man calmly explained that it was a magical interface. With it, they could understand each other perfectly. In simple terms, it created a way for them to communicate. Then he said they should talk properly. He introduced himself casually, saying he had also come from another world, basically, someone like them. Ingrid looked surprised. Shin instinctively stepped in front of her. His mind started racing. This man could use the same kind of system without the holy sword. That meant the pendant he was holding had to be something similar, maybe even another sacred weapon. The man continued, saying he had watched Shin's fight earlier. He praised his tactics and called him a skilled warrior. Then he asked if Shin would consider fighting alongside him. Shin didn't answer right away. He thought about it carefully. The man didn't seem hostile. There was no clear threat directed at him. For a moment, he considered listening to what he had to say. But that wasn't enough. Even if the man meant no harm to him, there was no guarantee he wasn't Ingrid's enemy. Before Shin could respond, Ingrid suddenly stepped forward. She pulled down her hood and reached toward the man's pendant. She identified it immediately. She said that necklace was the holy axe, Karlam. Then she demanded to know why he had it. Shin was caught off guard. The man turned his attention to her, asking who she was. In response, Ingrid rolled up her sleeve and revealed a glowing mark. The light was so bright that the man had to shield his eyes. When he saw it clearly, his expression completely changed. He was stunned and asked how she could possibly bear that crest. She calmly introduced herself as Ingrid Sayama Mistonia, the third princess of the Mistonia kingdom. Shin stood there in shock, trying to process what he had just heard. He scratched his head and admitted he had no idea what was going on anymore, asking her to explain. She turned slightly toward him and began to clarify that the man was holding one of the sacred treasures. But before she could finish, the man suddenly dropped to one knee. He addressed her with full respect, calling her, "Your Highness." Both of them froze. He introduced himself as Beowulf and said he had come under orders from his king to assist her. Ingrid looked at him in disbelief, recognizing his name. She said she had heard of him, the famous hero from Jaegerland. That made Shin feel slightly uneasy. He watched as Ingrid extended her hand toward Beowulf, speaking formally and thanking the king who had sent him. Beowulf gently took her hand and placed a respectful kiss on it, expressing his gratitude that she was safe. Shin just stood there, completely lost, watching everything unfold. Then it hit him. They were still in the middle of a busy street in Tokyo, drawing attention from people around them. As Beowulf stood up, Shin awkwardly pointed out that this wasn't the best place for a serious conversation. He suggested they move somewhere else. Beowulf apologized politely, still addressing him in a formal tone, and agreed. Shin walked ahead while the two of them followed behind, continuing their conversation. He couldn't hear everything clearly, but something about it made him uneasy. When they reached the RV, Ingrid looked relieved. She said that with the help of a renowned hero like Beowulf, reclaiming the shrine should now be certain. Beowulf confidently assured her to leave everything to him. He even swore to complete the mission, no matter the cost. Shin watched them quietly. Just a little while ago, he had been happy, but now something felt off. His chest felt tight. He remembered how Ingrid had praised him earlier, calling him admirable. But now that feeling had changed into something heavy. It wasn't just emotional, it almost felt physical. His breathing became uneven, and for a moment, he couldn't even understand what was happening to him. Then Beowulf suddenly turned the conversation toward him. He asked Ingrid who Shin really was. Shin quickly answered for himself, introducing himself as Masato Uga. He said he had only met Ingrid that morning. Beowulf asked if it was just coincidence. Shin replied that it was. There was a brief silence. Then Ingrid stepped between them. She corrected him, saying his name was Makoto, and added that he was a warrior with exceptional skill, something Beowulf had already witnessed. Shin looked at her, surprised, but she didn't stop there. She declared that he was the chosen wielder of the holy sword Signel, the hero of this world. Even Beowulf was taken aback. Then Ingrid grabbed Shin's sleeve and added something that completely changed the atmosphere. She said he was also her fiancé. She turned to Shin for confirmation. Caught off guard, he gave a small, hesitant yes. Beowulf's expression hardened. He questioned it, asking if she truly intended to be with someone from another world. Even if Shin was strong and chosen by the holy sword, she was still a princess. There would surely be complications. Shin stayed silent. Ingrid, however, didn't waver. She held on to Shin's hand firmly and said there was no problem. To her, this wasn't something strange. It was fate. Shin looked at her, confused. Then she explained something unexpected. Her grandmother, Junko Sayama, had also come from the mortal world. Hearing that, Shin froze in shock. She explained that her grandmother, just like Makoto, had originally come from the mortal world. Shin was stunned. He asked if that really meant her grandmother had once been someone like him. Ingrid nodded and said that long ago, their kingdom, Mistonia, had been overwhelmed by miasma, with monsters spreading everywhere. During that crisis, her grandmother had been summoned from the mortal realm to save them. However, after being summoned, she gradually lost most of her original language. Beowulf reacted immediately, saying he had heard that story before. He spoke about the legendary Holy Maiden Sayama, the one who saved Mistonia during that era. To him, she was someone blessed by another world. Ingrid continued, her tone becoming heavier. She revealed that both her parents had been killed by Arald. Her siblings, including her brother, were all missing. That left her as the only surviving member of the royal family. Because of that, she said she now had the freedom to choose her own partner. Beowulf still couldn't accept it so easily. He pointed out that she had only met Shin that very day and questioned whether such a decision wasn't too rushed. He added that his king, Frosagil, and her late father had been close allies, and that her future was something they deeply cared about. Ingrid didn't back down. She said her grandmother always believed that marriage was about timing and momentum. Shin stood there, completely overwhelmed by how confidently she said it. She continued, saying that Shin had expressed his feelings sincerely and proposed to her with genuine emotion, something she had never experienced before. Then she opened her arms slightly and asked Beowulf to bless their relationship. That made Shin's eyes widen. Beowulf slowly pulled out his pendant and activated it. The small object transformed back into its original form, a massive axe. The sight left Shin speechless. Ingrid immediately recognized it. She said it was the sacred axe once enshrined at Kilvis. She had believed it was lost or destroyed when the temple fell. Beowulf paused for a moment, then explained. His younger sister, Milim, had been a priestess at that very temple. When Arold's forces attacked, she had sent the holy axe away to protect it. After that, the temple was taken over, and the sacred weapon was replaced with its corrupted version, the demonic axe. Ingrid's expression turned serious. Beowulf then stated his mission clearly: to protect Ingrid, reclaim the Temple of Kilvis, and rescue his sister. He lowered himself slightly and asked Shin if he would fight alongside him. Ingrid responded first, saying their goals were the same. They both wanted to reclaim the temple. Then she turned to Shin with a gentle smile. Shin didn't hesitate this time. He agreed. Beowulf lifted his axe and formally declared his blessing for Princess Ingrid of Mistonia and for Makoto, the chosen wielder of the holy sword. He wished that great glory would await them both. The axe started glowing brightly, and within seconds people nearby began gathering. Some were even taking photos, pointing at the strange light and calling it incredible. Shin immediately panicked. He told them people were staring and that waving around a glowing weapon in public was a terrible idea. He warned that the police could show up any second and told Beowulf to put it away quickly. Both of them looked confused at his reaction, but they followed his lead. Once the axe was hidden again, Beowulf properly introduced himself to Shin and greeted him with a smile. Shin still felt like everything was getting out of control, but he shook his hand anyway. Beowulf told him to just call him Wolf and happily declared that they were now comrades, friends. That word stuck with Shin for a moment. Then suddenly, a familiar voice interrupted them. The staff member from the sushi restaurant showed up looking annoyed. She pointed straight at Beowulf and said he hadn't paid his bill. Beowulf looked confused and asked what she was saying. The staff showed the receipt, over 34,000 yen. Then she turned to Shin and asked if he was his friend, basically making it clear that he would be the one paying. Shin noticed more people starting to gather again, which only made things worse. Meanwhile, Ingrid casually looked at the sky and commented on how beautiful the sunset was. Shin awkwardly agreed, trying to stay calm. Right then, Beowulf suddenly appeared behind them again, excitedly talking about how amazing the van was and how much faster it was than a horse. That's when reality hit Shin. He remembered what Beowulf had said earlier about relying on him for food and shelter, and then it clicked. Neither Beowulf nor Ingrid had any money. That meant everything, from food to travel to lodging, would fall on him. He silently cursed himself. Still, Ingrid yawned and asked where they were going next. He said they'd head to a campground and planned to buy some meat and vegetables for a barbecue. Both of them looked curious, clearly unfamiliar with the idea. Shin thought about his savings. He had enough to live comfortably for a few years thanks to the money he earned working for his family. But now, things were different. At a store, he paid for all the groceries while the other two carried the items without much concern. Later, when they reached a campground in Kahoku, the receptionist told him the cost, 5,000 yen per night. He did a quick calculation in his head. At this rate, supporting 3 people. His savings might not even last a year. Still, once the food was ready, both Ingrid and Beowulf were completely absorbed in it. Beowulf excitedly talked about the rich flavor of the meat, amazed at how good it tasted. Ingrid mentioned how the chewy white ingredient reminded her of something from earlier, but this time it tasted sweeter and even more delicious. For a moment, despite all the chaos, things felt strangely peaceful. Beowulf was completely absorbed in the food, chewing loudly and excitedly, asking what it was. He said it was his first time eating something like this, amazed at how the taste seemed to change depending on how it was prepared. Shin didn't say much, just watching quietly. Then Ingrid, sitting close beside him, softly thanked him. She leaned against him, catching him off guard. She said that when they first arrived in this world, she never imagined they would be able to sit like this, sharing a warm, peaceful moment, and that it was all because of him. That made him pause. He remembered how she had openly called him her fiancé earlier. Suddenly, all the small worries he had, money, planning, everything, felt kind of pointless. He turned to her and admitted he never expected things to turn out like this. He told her he was grateful for the fate that brought them together, but she shook her head slightly and said she felt bad for dragging him into something so dangerous. He immediately denied that and said he didn't mind at all, even saying he would risk his life for her. She didn't accept that. She told him clearly that she wanted him to stay alive, with her. Nearby, Beowulf sat casually, watching the exchange and muttering that he didn't know what to make of it. After some more chatting, Shin suggested they should get cleaned up and take a shower. Both Ingrid and Beowulf looked confused. That's when he realized something. He would have to teach them even the basics, like how to use a shower, and even things like toilets. Right on cue, Beowulf suddenly stood up and announced that he needed to go. He casually pointed toward some bushes, saying he would handle it there and ask them not to come near. Shin immediately stopped him, saying that wasn't happening. A little later, Shin found himself leaning against the wall near a public restroom, explaining everything step by step. Using the magic window, he showed them visuals, making it easier for them to understand. Thankfully, both Ingrid and Beowulf picked it up quickly. After they finished, Beowulf sincerely thanked him. Ingrid also shyly expressed her gratitude with a small, quiet thank you. Beowulf then mentioned that from Shin's perspective, they might seem a bit uncivilized. Shin looked confused. Beowulf explained that in their world, they usually handled such things using magic. Shin awkwardly replied, trying to process that. Then Beowulf added that even though they were now friends, it didn't feel right to rely on Shin for everything. He wanted to contribute as well. So he suggested something. He offered to teach Shin magic. Shin looked at him, surprised. Beowulf said they could start with something basic, life magic. As an example, he explained that with a simple, clean spell, even things like waste could be dealt with instantly without any trouble. Beowulf casually added that with this magic, Shin wouldn't even need a toilet anymore. Shin stared at him, unsure if he heard that right. Beowulf clarified that he genuinely wanted to teach him magic. Shin asked if that was even possible. Beowulf explained that normally people from this world couldn't use magic because of how its rules worked. But since Shin had formed a contract with the Holy Sword, things were different. That connection allowed him to use the window. Shin pointed at the floating interface and asked if he meant that. Ingrid confirmed it. She explained that the window acted as a bridge between the spirit world and the physical world. Through it, Shin could draw mana and use magic. He thought about it for a moment, then awkwardly asked Beowulf to teach him. Beowulf smiled, saying he was glad he could finally be of use. Shin immediately brought up the life magic he mentioned earlier, the one that could clean things instantly. Beowulf explained that life magic used simple formulas, easy enough that even children in their world could use it. Still, it was essential in daily life. To demonstrate, he raised his finger and quietly said a spell. A small flame flickered to life at the tip of his finger. Shin leaned in, watching closely. Beowulf continued, saying there were many basic spells and used the window to show examples. Ignite, cleansing, whispering, gentle breeze, light, and silencing. He added that even someone from Shin's world could probably learn them within a few months. Then he asked what Shin thought. Shin placed a hand on his chin and said he wanted to try. Both Ingrid and Beowulf looked at him, curious. As Shin focused on the window, something strange happened. Information started flowing into his mind, not just images, but something deeper. He could feel energy moving, like a pulse connecting through the window. He slowly raised his hand. A spark appeared. Then flames burst from his fingers. Both Ingrid and Beowulf were stunned. Shin, on the other hand, broke into an excited grin, almost like a kid. He shouted that he actually did it and asked what this strange sensation was. Ingrid said it was incredible and asked how he managed it so quickly. Beowulf was even more shocked. Even if it was basic magic, this shouldn't have been possible on the first try. Shin laughed and pointed at the window, saying that was the key. The moment he saw the image, it just clicked in his head. He said he felt like he already understood it and that he could probably do the others too. Without waiting, he tried another one. Light began glowing from his palm. Ingrid called it amazing. Beowulf just stared, completely bewildered. Shin, now fully excited, said he was getting the hang of it. Then he focused again and said he wanted to try the next one. Silencing. Shin tested the next spell and immediately jumped in place, tapping his feet against the ground. Then he started running. There was no sound, even on gravel. He stopped, wide-eyed, and said this was insanely useful. Moving silently like that felt almost unreal. Ingrid got excited too. She said that even with the help of the window, mastering magic this quickly was unbelievable. To her, Shin's understanding was on another level. She even turned to Beowulf, urging him to agree. Beowulf didn't argue. He looked just as shocked. Shin, now fully hyped, asked if he could go even further. He brought up the kind of magic Beowulf used earlier, the powerful one that blew the monster apart. Ingrid said it was possible. But there was a condition. For humans to use that level of magic, they needed surgery. Shin immediately asked what kind. Without hesitation, Beowulf removed his upper clothing, revealing a muscular body. He pointed to a mark on his chest and explained that a hole would be made in the sternum. Then an elven elixir would be poured in. If the process succeeded, it would create something called a magic reactor inside the body. Ingrid added that elves naturally had these reactors, which allowed them to use powerful magic. The surgery was a way to artificially give that ability to others. Shin felt uneasy just hearing it. Beowulf quickly told him not to rush into something like that. He explained that the survival rate was only about 50%. Even if someone survived, they would remain unconscious for a month. Ingrid added that they didn't even have the elixir right now. And on top of that, using higher-level magic also required forming contracts with spirits, which didn't exist in this world. Shin let out a small sigh, saying it was a bit disappointing. But Beowulf reassured him that even basic life magic could be incredibly useful in combat. That caught Shin's attention instantly. Beowulf then mentioned that after exploring the area, he realized there was still some time before the gate in this region fully opened. Since they had time, he suggested they should train. Shin asked what exactly he meant by gate. Ingrid explained that it was like a larger version of the window. When it opened, the laws of the physical world would break down, and strange phenomena would start overflowing. Shin immediately thought of Tokyo. Beowulf agreed, saying it was the same situation. He then stated his plan, to defeat the guardian of the shrine as soon as the gate opened, but he warned that the enemy would be strong, so they needed to prepare. Then he looked at Shin. He said that during the earlier fight, he noticed Shin hadn't fully mastered the holy sword yet. Shin listened carefully. Beowulf told him not to worry. Just like with magic, he believed Shin would quickly learn how to use it properly. He emphasized that mastering the holy sword was essential for the battles ahead.